Okay, so we are live. This should be a pretty epic stream. I have a lot to talk about. This stream we're going to discuss tonight took me a long time to get through, longer than most streams that are of the same length, just because it covers such a wide range of topics, and they are actually very much related. So we're going to talk about many of them in this stream. And but if you are joining us, please hit the like button. It really helps fuel the algorithm. Comment in the chat if you have any questions, and I will get to it. If you hear me well, please comment in the chat and let me know in the chat that everything's working. It also helps fuel the algorithm. So if you support this channel, then please hit the like button. Like I said, hit the bell notification, comment in the chat, leave your comments below, etc. Everything that you can do to engage helps quite a bit, and I sincerely appreciate it. So we are going to discuss a interview that is another one that Chris Williamson did. Chris Williamson is the host of the interview that we discussed last week, actually. And normally I try to change things up, but he recently did an interview with Eric Weinstein that I thought was very good. So I wanted to discuss it. It is Rosh Hashanah, so this is the first stream of the Jewish New Year. So if you are someone who celebrates, then Shana Tova, as we say. But celebrate with apples and honey in most of the Eastern European Jewish communities a lot. It's like symbolizes a sweet New Year, and so 10 days from now, not 10 days from now, 10 days from Rosh Hashanah, which was Friday night, which was also on the Sabbath. So that was interesting. Is Yom Kippur, which is the day of repentance and atonement. So there's all these Jewish holidays that are coming up in the next few weeks, and so if I have to move a stream, I appreciate you guys bearing with me. But here is the channel that we're going to be discussing. Chris Williamson. And he does a huge range of discussions with all kinds of different people. And that seems to be actually an ongoing trend more recently, which there's good things about it, and also I also appreciate a very focused channel. But as we just move forward in the evolution of humanity, all of these topics become increasingly intertwined. So there's no way to really avoid this type of kind of broad but also very related type of content, hence the things we talk about on this channel. So this is the specific stream that we're going to be discussing, and it is called Why Can No One Agree on the Truth? And so in it they discuss physics, they discuss how physics has stopped its progress, why it stopped its progress, what physics progress would mean, which is actually something that Eric gets into this interview in a bit more detail that I really appreciate, and which is why we're going to talk about it. And they also talk about things involving the social challenges that people face today, young people and old people, and men and women, and all kinds of different topics. So here we go. I guess I'll give introduction for Eric, even though if you're watching this channel, you know who Eric Weinstein is. I'm a big fan of Eric Weinstein's, I guess, contributions to the discussions of physics and science in general, and even politics and all kinds of different topics that he does enter into. And he is also the creator of geometric unity, which is a proposed more fundamental theory, I will call it, of physics. And I think from my examination of it, I think it holds a lot of promise, a lot more promise than what is currently in the mainstream academic communities. But it is largely ignored by them. They know it exists, but they are very insular in the academic halls of physics. So we're going to talk about why that's the case. We're going to listen to what they talk about, and I think that Eric hits the nail right on the head as to why physics has changed. So this is kind of an interesting clip, though, because it sums up. It says a lot about academia in general today in the sciences. I don't know what is the limit to what is the sciences and what is not anymore. I think that is likely to expand, but we have to kind of figure out a better definition of what the sciences are. But where Chris references a discussion that he had with Avi Loeb, who I think is the leading astronomer at Harvard, and he is the founder of the Galileo Project, which is to try and examine UAP phenomenon and set up sensors around the world and look for evidence outside of government sponsored endeavors. So I highly respect Avi Loeb because he is very brave compared to most people in academia. He also is famous for his proposal that he thinks that Oumuamua, this object that is very long and skinny and highly reflective, that is from, it is presumed to be from outside of our solar system. He thinks that it is a piece of technology from another civilization, I believe. So, and I think a lot of people think that that's crazy, and I salute him for sticking to his guns on it. I have no real interest in Oumuamua, to be honest, but I think it's good that he is brave. But that said, this is a clip where he was asked by Chris Williamson, what are your thoughts on humans becoming an interplanetary species? And this is the response, which I think is telling of a lot of different issues in academia.
Seriously hitting this multiplanetary note, there is no interest in this.
From who? I'm interested.
Are you?
Fuck yeah. Don't I count, Eric?
Right.
Am I not legitimate in the future of this civilization's direction?
What are your best stories for how we become interplanetary? I say it because you brought it up.
Stories or strategies?
Stories about how we get to be interplanetary.
I'm not sure what you mean by story.
Tell me a story by which we have 10 planets that humans have settled.
Well, if you want to do 10, we're going to have to go to planets that are outside of the solar system.
Right. So there's this one which is really troubling. Mars is really screwing up this whole story because Elon has gotten everybody
fixated,
focused on Mars, and it's a marginal planet that would be very difficult to get to using chemical rockets, and it's not a stepping stone because once you master Mars, if which we're not going to do, it doesn't really get you anywhere. It's just Mars.
So Avi Loeb,
Yep.
new book that recently came out, Interstellar. Spoke to him last week about it.
Okay.
I asked him about this. I said, will we ever visit other galaxies? And he made this cop-out answer of saying, well, Andromeda's going to crash into the Milky Way. I was like, that doesn't count, Avi. We can't blend two together and say that we've been there.
Right.
And he's talking about interstellar travel, right? Mm-hmm. From here to Proxima Centauri. Pick your other star, right? They are trying at some point in the not too distant future to do the light sail laser pointed at it thing. Maybe we can, and this was me asking him, my conception was generation ships. You and the next 500 generations of your progeny, you condemn them to be locked in this tin box, and it's group sex and plants and CO2 for the next however long until you get to Proxima Centauri, hope that it's not totally wrecked. His point was light sail, desktop DNA sequencer, artificial womb, send it out there.
You guys are being ridiculous.
It's a thought experiment. This is my story.
I know.
This is my story.
Okay.
This is my story, and I'm allowed to tell my story.
But it's exactly why I wanted it. Just to riff. Okay. It's an enervating story.
What's that?
We're not energized by this story. Except for the group sex and the plants, right?
Yep.
So the issue is,
if we could sprinkle some bukkake in there, everybody would get on board. And Melissa Chen would be there.
Moving at light speed. What we're doing is that we're telling people we've crawled inside our modern theories, and our modern theories make our imaginations our enemy. We're not excited about the idea. We don't really believe that we're going to open a wormhole. We don't really believe in multi-generation ships. We don't believe that we're going to reboot from tardigrades. We don't believe that we're going to scan all of our synapses and reconstruct the brain from the beginning. Einstein is the problem. Now, I know Avi decently well, and Avi, for the Galileo project that he's heading up, doesn't want people to consider new physics. So whenever I speak at all as somebody affiliated with the Galileo project, with wearing that hat, I don't think about new physics at all. I accept the constraints of the physics we know.
Yes.
When I take that hat off, it's all about new physics. It's not about new technology using the old physics.
Okay. So, a lot to cover here, but I think that Avi's answer is very interesting because it's exactly what I would have expected. It is exactly what you would get from, Neil deGrasse Tyson, and I'm not saying they're the same, and everybody has their unique contributions to add to society. That's not the point. The point is that we do not know who to ask the questions that in order to get the answers that we want. There are two problems. We don't know the right questions to ask is one of them. This is an increasingly big issue in society today, but it is especially prevalent in academia where their job is to ask and then answer questions. But they don't know what questions to ask. They don't have really very many new questions to ask that are true questions, and we'll talk about what that is, and I have on other streams. But there is a true question, and then there is a not a true question. And then there are good questions and bad questions. Good questions, Eric talks about this a lot as well, and I do on my streams quite often as well, as that a good question is a question that can be answered within the context in which it's asked. The best questions almost answer themselves by the time you finish saying the question. You get the answer. But the bad questions cannot be answered. There is no answer to the question that you are asking. One of these bad questions that's commonly asked is, we almost talked about this today, but I'm saving this for another stream, is what is the origin of life? Like, this is a bad question according to my work in sentient singularity theory, is because we don't even know what life is. We haven't asked the right questions in order to even define what it is, so that we can ask the right questions to give us the answers that we really want, which we can feel the questions that we really want. We just don't know exactly what they would be when you actually speak them. And so this is the problem with academia, and this is one of the big problems with academia, and especially in the physics community, of which, astronomy, cosmology, and mathematics, all of these things are very tied to physics, even philosophy, and increasingly so computer science. But that's, I think, those are better directions to go down than this focus on astronomy and physics is not a very helpful thing anymore. It was for a time, and Eric is kind of saying here that the Einstein is the problem, and this is almost like a super literally true statement. It's Einstein. He did incredible things, and he made incredible contributions, but we need to figure out a way to break out of relativity in every single subject, not just physics, but it's learning how to do this in any field allows you to do it in almost all fields. And but when you don't know how to do that, then what you do is you end up just kind of recycling whatever it is that you have. So the only answers that you can give to things are what Eric said at the very end. I'm not sure if the audio caught it, but he said we don't need new technology with old physics. We need new physics completely. And this is a very good way of stating kind of what where we're at when it comes to trying to figure out what is how to do things that currently seem impossible, like bypassing the speed of causality, the speed of light. And Uh, but this focus on this trap that we're in right now of being trapped within relativity, it transcends just physics. It goes into politics. It goes into gender dynamics. It goes into sociology. It goes into economics. It goes into everything. And Erica said something before, something like, when true growth stops, it causes, I forgot exactly the wording that he uses, but it causes kind of like psychopathic tendencies, I think. It's something like that. But basically, when growth stops, everybody starts lying. That's really the what it is. And not just to others, but to themselves as well. And so, when we're talking about the future of humanity, though, and we're talking about trying to move great distances in space, what appears to be great distances in space, and if you think that we need to become a multiplanetary species in order to survive, which we're going to talk about that as well specifically, but assuming you do think that, or assuming that you even would want to become that, even if you don't think that it's necessary, or that you would want to have the ability to do it, getting to Mars and using chemical rockets is literally a dead end. It is absolutely a dead end. Rockets have their purpose. Actually, I think they're pretty awesome in some ways. I mean, they launch satellites into orbit, and I think that is obviously a very useful thing. We all rely on satellites constantly. Just as a side note, speaking of chemical rockets, I have always been interested in aerospace technology, and I've been waiting. I live in Los Angeles, and I've been waiting to catch a launch from Vandenberg Air Force Base, because if they launch it at the right time, right after the sun has gone down, it launches way high up into the atmosphere, and as it starts staging and everything like that, it gets backlit and it looks awesome. This past week, I did actually see it for the first time. I took my dog out and I was walking back, and this wasn't a SpaceX launch. It was like a Space Force launch of some type of device. I don't know. It wasn't people, but and I think the company was called Firefly. But as I'm walking back inside, I see this like contrail up in the sky that is more defined and more intense than any I've ever seen from any plane. And I was like, is that just a really well lit plane? And then I was like, it looks like a missile. And then it hit me. Oh my gosh, I think that's a rocket. And then it just separated and started staging, and it was so cool. It was like the perfect timing. But here it is. You can see it like staging way up there. Granted, it's
literally perfect, like lighting. Yeah, it's staging right now. You can see it. You can.
Well, that's it. Like everything in the sky, it is not as well. It is not as impressive, when you record it on your phone. But it is still pretty cool. So I wanted to share. And come on. Okay. So, but you're not going to go anywhere when after Mars if you're still relying on chemical rockets. Where would you go to live? And why would you even go to Mars in the first place? We would colonize Antarctica. Before we colonized Mars, if it was out of necessity, we would seastead before we colonized Antarctica. Seasteading, if we really need more space and people want to be pioneers and in a modern, much more technologically advanced way than people who moved west in the United States or something. If you wanted to, if we needed to have a group of people that was kind of the modern equivalent of that, I think seasteading is probably much more likely than us going to Mars. There's so many problems with Mars if you're stuck in a relativistic context. You can't have any real-time communication with Earth. It takes a long time to get there. It takes a lot of resources to get there and back. And then you get there, and what's the point? Why did you go? Why not just build another level on top of a skyscraper? Why not just build a house in Antarctica? Why not just build a floating mansion, off Bora Bora, and then just fish all day or something? I mean, there's so many better strategies for expanding our resources as far as space goes. If you need, to build a house somewhere, there's no reason to go to Mars. And the idea that it's a backup planet that from Earth, I mean, we'll talk about this, but sentient singularity theory states would imply that we don't need a backup planet because of the evolutionary process that life is going through is going to prevail over the apparent doom that humanity faces, which I for a while I did believe exactly what Eric believes, which is that we're doomed without the technology has doomed us, and it has doomed us essentially. It is going to take a black swan event. It's just a matter of which black swan event you believe is going to save humanity. But humanity has been doomed by its own technology, and I don't believe that Mars saves us because technology follows us. And we're going to talk more about this in a bit because we're going to look at some other clips. But we absolutely, without a game change, we would be doomed. It's not a possibility. It is a certainty. And I believe it is a certainty that we overcome that, or that it is overcome for us, is a better way of putting it. But, just the natural process that we are within, and the intentions of the universe itself. But this, if you don't believe that, and you believe we need to go to other planets to save humanity, or that you just want to go beyond Mars, there is no way to go further than Mars without doing something different than rockets that overcomes the constraints of the speed of causality, which is the speed of light, but it's more accurate to say the speed of causality. And at least within relativity, it is the speed of causality. And we need to think about new ways to do this, to overcome this, if you want to actually escape relativity. But I'm not even saying we should, but I do believe it's possible. I think Eric's right in that it is possible to do it, regardless. I don't believe that we need to do it, and I don't believe necessarily we should think about at least whether or not we should. But I do believe that we can. So with that. But this answer by Avi Loeb of just this oh well, one day the galaxies are going to crash into each other. This is just a cop-out answer, like Chris Williamson said. It's not inspiring. It doesn't change anything, and there's no point to it. That's why nobody cares. Nobody cares about generation ships that go out into the the cosmos that much. Beyond making kind of a B-level movie about it. I don't know if you've ever seen the show Passengers, but that's kind of an example of this it's a pretty good example of this concept. And it's so incredibly depressing in and of itself, but even when you start to philosophically break it down and realize that what did you really overcome by going into space? I don't think anything. Human problems that if we need to overcome our own doom that is due to our own hand, it is our stewardship of technology that is the problem, and that doesn't change with anything other than a changing of stewardship. But here, it's just such a typical kind of here's some it's like this it's I was eating a piece of fruit, it was like a tangerine or something the other day, and I was like, why do people even make candy? Why do we have Starbursts instead of just eating an orange? Because I think it's better than Starburst. I think Starburst tastes pretty good, or Skittles, or whatever the heck, fruity little candy that you can imagine. Why do we make these kind of empty, nutritionless kind of substitutes for that which is actually has substance to it, but also is ticking the box as far as I want something sweet? And we have this now in a lot of discussions about physics with leading academicians, including even Avi Loeb, who's not really a physicist. He is an astronomer. That's what he is. He's not a physicist. I don't think that even people with physics degrees are truly, most of them, physicists today, but Avi Loeb doesn't even have a physics degree, and he's not focused on it. I'm not saying you need the degree. Eric doesn't have a physics degree. I don't have a physics degree. But if your focus is on rocks orbiting the solar system, you are not, your projects are not about the things that are necessary in order to figure out how to have technological solutions to maneuvering through space. Like, it's just not your wheelhouse, really. I mean, unless we're calculating orbits. But this is them getting into a bit more of things that I, think are more interesting. But this is them talking about, this next clip, about just the current state of physics.
For 39 years, we've been dominated by one community's madness. And that community is called quantum gravity, string theory, or M theory. It changed what we were researching. Its cardinal sin is not about string theory. It's not about quantum gravity. It changed the questions that defined what it meant to be a fundamental physicist. So if I say to you, how many generations of matter are there?
I don't know.
You don't know that it's 3 because we don't talk about that all the time anymore. Or if I say, do you know why is matter chiral? You wouldn't know about that. Or if I said, what's the nature of the quartic potential for the Higgs field? Or why is there a Yukawa coupling in one case and a minimal coupling somewhere else? All of the real physics questions that would cause progress got subtly replaced between 1984 and like 1987. And then we had questions like, how do we quantize gravity? And that became this, that is the ultimate question. Well, it's not. That's just wrong. This comes out of Bryce DeWitt. This comes out of a guy who in 1952 went with his wife to the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research in Bombay, then wrote an essay for something called the Gravity Research Foundation that was about anti-gravity, and he was supposed to write an essay, and then he said, well, to get anti-gravity, what you'd really need to do is to do quantum gravity. And for 70 years, we've been trying to do quantum gravity, and it's an abject failure. And the physicists at the helm changed the questions. The official questions should sound something like this. Why are there 3 generations of matter? Why is it flavor chiral? What is the nature and the origin of the Higgs mechanism? Why are we in 1,3 dimensions? And what is with SU3 cross SU2 cross U1, which is a bunch of symmetries? And why does it seem to represent on a 16-dimensional space with the observed quantum numbers? And that may not mean a lot to you, but I guarantee you, if there are physicists in the audience, they're getting pissed off right now because they allowed their subject to be dragged away from our real questions for reasons that are unclear and put in the service of these questions that can't be answered. And we can't even question them 39 years into this complete train wreck that is the community that could build the life raft.
What is so seductive about quantum everything?
Quantum gravity?
Yeah.
It allows for toy problems so that you can not do your work on the world that we have. And you can say, well, the world that we have is too complicated, so I created this fake world over here that's not in 4 dimensions, it's in 2 dimensions, it's not in Lorentzian signature, it's in Euclidean signature, it's not the full gauge group, it's just SU2, and I've changed all the parameters. And then I say, and I've made some minor incremental progress in that fake world. And then everybody claps.
Okay, so I love that he said this. I mean, he says his narrative is on this subject is pretty consistent, but he specifically said something that is very defining of the problem, and it is that we have changed the questions that are being asked, and we're assuming certain questions. And I'm going to say that those questions that we are assuming must be answered and that have not been answered cannot be answered. So things like, how do we quantize gravity? The way that we think of, where you're looking for little gravitons and things like that. This is, I don't believe, something that can be successfully done because it doesn't line up with, I think, what it would be a natural and logical universe. And this problem with the reason why I think that this is happening, and this is just my own speculation, is that I think that you must presuppose an origin for a universe in order to even start considering what fundamental constraints would apply to the universe. And then you can actually start to see what does this line up with what we observe. And I think that there is such an opposition to presupposing an origin to the cosmos that is an intentional sentient origin, God, that it doesn't allow for us to even set this up properly. So what we do is we try and bring it into our world with us, and we can then act as the creator of a game universe, of a little toy universe. And because we're different than an initial sentient creator in certain key constraints that can be imagined, that they're not like so beyond logic or anything like that you can't even hope to understand them. No, you actually can if you really start examining it from, the first principles of first principles, but and with humility. But when we act as the creators, we don't realize that there are certain constraints that an initial creator would have that we don't have, and it changes and opens up the possibility space. Basically, not I don't want to say endlessly, but so much so that there's now all these different possibilities that we could have, and there's no indication of which one could be true because none of them appear to be exactly true. And we're missing the part that an initial sentient creator would it be so much it's constrained in such a way that, according to my work, that those constraints would only allow for one way to make a universe. And that way is the way that it is. And that's part of the problem. The other part of the problem, and this is more speculation as well on my part, but it's not as much, like this is, when I say more speculative, I mean, I can kind of see what the problem is regarding my previous explanation that I just gave. I can see that because I work on it, and I have worked on it, and I've had both perspectives, and so I know what that impact can have on your ability to see what would be certain requirements in certain processes of the unfolding of the universe, if you were to try and make it from an initial singular sentient being. And but I've also not subscribed to that idea before in the past, so I know what it's like to be like, well, it could be like this, well, it could be like this, it could be like this. But you're not starting from this fundamental rock that if it exists, sets the constraints so precisely that there's only one path that you can go down. And this is a huge part of the problem. The other part of the problem could be that we are intentionally being misled by people, and maybe not even people, maybe beings of some type that have access to the technology that we would be that are maybe trying to prevent us from acquiring it. And I know that sounds crazy if you're new to this channel, but I'm assuming that the UAP phenomenon is real and that they can do the things that Eric is trying to, or that Eric states that can also be done, and I agree that they probably can. And if they do exist, then I think it's logical to assume that they are maybe preventing or misleading us away from mass manifestation of technology that can do this. And there might be a good reason for that, but ultimately, even if their intentions aren't what we would want, but it doesn't matter. It could be I don't know, like what people just think that this stuff is some type of human conspiracy where they're trying to hide technology. And if you're going to do that, you really have to mislead the world away from a natural progression in physics. And we should have hit the next level of breakthroughs in understanding fundamental physics already. After it's been so long since the nuclear era, and progress in this type of stuff is exponential, and so it's been too long. It does imply that something has changed that's not that has changed and led us away from the normal exponential progression of technology and physics understanding or just scientific understanding. And if it's on a global scale like it is, it does imply that it might not be human led, at least, even if it's got co-conspirators. But that's total speculation. But I mean, Eric has mentioned it before, and other streams on Joe Rogan, he talked about this, how it might be that string theory and related ideas were an intentional setup to throw us off the trail of overcoming relativity. And when you look at the story, it does seem very odd. I mean, Ed Witten, the leading voice in string theory right now, his father was a leading anti-gravity researcher, and there was such a focus on it, and then all of a sudden it was like everything went dark, and they said nothing worked. And this happens every time some physicist stands up every few decades and is like, check this out, actually I think I got results here, and then it ends up going dark. They say it didn't work. Actually, the results were false, but they quit their job and they started getting payments from DARPA or something like that. And so, it is weird, and there does appear to be some type of interest in this technology on a top secret level that, and then you see this weird narrative in the academic world across the entire globe, not just in one country or and not another, and that is indicative of kind of a much higher level of coordination than as far as some type of psyop that might be going on. I don't know. It could just be, though, that our schools have screwed us and screwed up our ability to think, and that is also something that is definitely true, and they'll talk about that here. So I know that's true. I will claim that I know that my first assertion is true. I don't know if the second one is true, but it might be. It makes a lot more sense if you're assuming certain things are true than a lot of other ideas that seem more mundane. So, I don't know. There's a lot going on in this that is in too much to cover in one stream. But I've talked about it before. What if geometric unity is right, but it's not going to be allowed by whatever powers may be, from the government to Lockheed Martin to non-NHIs to God, who knows? But just because there might be some intentionality to the current chaos. There is some intentionality to the current chaos. It's just a matter of where it's coming from is the question. But current lack of understanding. So, but this idea, this is what I wanted to really get into, is that his explanation of what the good questions would be are great. Why are there 3 generations of matter? Are there really 3 generations of matter, or is it 2 degrees of freedom plus an intrinsic constraint, or an imposter, as Eric calls it? Is it that why do we observe chirality? I mean, why do we observe the symmetry patterns that we see? These are the right questions, and they are not answered, or they are not asked by anybody because we have the answer. People are now assuming that we don't need to ask any more questions about it. So because we know that there's 3 generations of matter, we don't need to ask the question, is there really 3 generations of matter? Because the people who are currently accredited only got that way by assuming that there were 3 generations of matter, and then, probably forgot about it shortly after that, many of them. At least it appears that way, according to what Eric is stating. And it does seem that that is the case. When I've spoken to physics PhD students, their focus on what they are focused on is not what I think would be the right things to focus on. And what's interesting is that all of the questions that Eric asked there are questions that seem to be implied by my work to be the correct questions and answered by quite a bit of my work. So I don't know how much we're going to get into that specifically because there are other streams that I've done on it. But and I have a long produced stream coming out that goes through my entire models, but that shows where these symmetry structures come from. They come from constraints, initial constraints that lead to other constraints that lead to other constraints, and these constraints are also defining of the degrees of freedom that you have when you are going down a road of trying to map, the dimensions of the physical world, and but you have to start from an initial constraint that is assumed, and we don't. So but they're not asking the right questions in academia. They don't know what the right questions would be. I think Eric's questions are the right questions, but I also think that maybe they are not even it might not even be the right way to put it, is that they're the right questions. It might be that they are the questions that are answered by asking the right questions that aren't really those questions. Because even those, to ask something like this, to be like, why are there 3 generations of matter? You are already assuming that there's 3 generations of matter. If you want to actually have a fundamental theory, or a more fundamental theory, let's just say, of the existence of the cosmos, then what you would be asking, what the right questions would be questions way before even assuming that there are 3 generations of matter. And then you would just continue to model and see whether or not 3 generations of matter would emerge. Now, my work suggests that there would be we would perceive 3 generations of matter. But that it does also imply that Eric's probably right, that one of them is not like the others. My work implies that there's 2 degrees of freedom plus an intrinsic constraint plus an extrinsic constraint always. And these line up with the 4 primary perspectives of inside, outside, separate, and oneness that help us overcome, relativity and understand relationships that transcend scales. And so it's, but you, to get there, I didn't assume any of that. Like, you have to assume one thing. And I talk about this on my, or maybe two, on my Theories of Everything, the How-To Guide video. But I do think that what Eric is stating about these questions implies to me that geometric unity is legit, because my work seems to answer very much those questions as well, that he just stated, and seems to contextualize and explain them. What is chirality? Why do we see it? Why do we see the symmetry structures that we see? And and the generations that we appear to observe. And so these, but you can't presuppose these and get anywhere. And this is the problem. And I've talked about this also, again, on that video, Theories of Everything, the How-To Guide, is that, if you watch this channel regularly and you haven't seen that, you kind of have to watch that. It's pretty short, but it is an explanation of how to approach this topic of making progress in physics and our understanding of reality itself, and kind of finding an ultimate theory, a final theory, a fundamental theory. But this, the way in which you have to go about this is so unique and so different from any other endeavor that you would attempt to accomplish in academia or in the sciences, because you have to basically throw out all previous assumptions, except the ones that you know through logic and through experience you can trust more to be true more than anything else. One of them is I am, and the other one is that existence is inherently one. By definition, it is one. So you can use logic to just infer that obviously existence itself is one. There's only one existence, because anything outside of existence would be non-existent, and therefore we shouldn't even be talking about it, because if we do, it's going to get confusing. But from those assumptions, you can start to actually build a model that will answer the questions of why do we observe 3 generations of matter? Why do we see SU3 cross SU2 cross U1 symmetry structures? Why do even things that string theorists say, like, why is there a 6-dimensional manifold implied at every point in space and time? Like, those types of things emerge from a theory that starts truly fundamentally and builds from there, and in a way that is rigorous enough and is approached with enough humility and to keep it on path. But while I did get excited when I heard Eric say these questions of why do we observe chirality? Why do we observe 3 generations of matter? Why do we see the symmetry structures we have? Like, all of these things are much more central implications of my work than a lot of the other questions that people ask, like, how do you quantize gravity? My work implies that you can't the same way that most people think. And it seems like geometric unity is the same. You harmonize gravity, is what Eric Weinstein has stated. And I've said before, and I don't know if this is exactly the right way to think about it, but it's kind of there, is that you're like inside the graviton more so than we're going to like find little gravitons. So this, but you can't even know what the right questions are until you go through this process. And this has been this is something I'm writing in my paper currently right now, or I recently was writing more on, and it is about the problems that occur when you're looking at kind of trying to understand the world in its on a most fundamental level, is that in order to even know what the right questions are to or what the relevant questions are, to even know what the definition of a theory of everything is, or a fundamental theory is, I like that term better, or to even know how to judge one versus another, you can only really do this if you've gone through the process in a way that is logically rigorous, and that you've started from from an initially true starting point. And I think that multiple people have done this, but I think only they can really tell us, and I'm including myself in one of those people that can tell others, so not tell us, but only people who have gone through that process like I've gone through, and what seems like Eric's gone through, can tell people who have not gone through this process what it is, what it answers, how it answers things, what it is even defined as, and how to apply it, how to judge it. Like, these are things that you cannot know without going through this, because every other, if you haven't gone through this process and started truly from, I don't want to say from nothing, because you don't start from nothing. There is no fire that lights itself. There is an eternal flame, and that fire grows. So you have to assume that, and then try and figure out how it grows. But this, if you don't go through that, then you're the only paradigms that you can approach the problems from a relativistic standpoint already. So, not a fundamental standpoint. And so you can't know what you need to know in order to judge and interpret and do really understand at all these what are the right questions to even ask. And like I said before, the best questions answer themselves almost. And I didn't try and answer any questions that Eric asked there, but all those questions seem answered by my work, all of them. And that is kind of that's how you want science to be done, is you start from very, very, very solid foundations, as solid as you can get them, and then you see what is answered by asking, next, if that, then next, if that, then next, if that, then, if that, then, if that, then, if that, then, and you just do that again and again. And but we're all the people who are in control of the institutions right now are they have no experience with this because there is no degree that you can get in it. And this is another issue with this stuff. Is like you cannot get a degree in a totally new idea, and especially one that is a fundamental theory. It's not just a new theory within an existing field. It is its own field of study. This is another problem with it, is that you have to recognize that there are different rules than the current rules that we think of in physics, because what a fundamental theory is it is not a theory that that you work backwards in order to get. You have to work forwards in order to build a theory, a fundamental theory. And working backwards doesn't allow you to see things from the unique perspective necessary that is natural when you work forwards from fundamentality. And so, but when Eric says things like, "Oh, if there's physicists in the crowd, they're getting mad right now," I don't think physicists care about any of the stuff that he's saying, and I'm not saying that to belittle him or anyone. I sat there, and when he said those things, I was like, yes. I wasn't getting mad. I am cheering. And but at the same time, I don't think that physicists who listen to him, who have degrees in physics, not people who actually hear the music, as they say in Oppenheimer, but the people who just memorized the math, those people, when they hear those questions that Eric just stated, they're sitting there thinking, we already know that those things exist. We don't need to know anything else about them, so I don't know why you're focused on them, and those questions seem totally arbitrary. Why those? And they have no idea. And that's what I think is actually happening. And so why would they take it seriously? Because they must rely on something logical in order to, guide their attention. And if they didn't work this out themselves, then they're not going to know why those questions are important ones. But I don't even think that those are the right questions to ask. They are key questions that are answered when you do ask the initial right questions, and that come long before those. The answers to those questions. I never asked those questions in my work, but I do think I've got essentially the answers to all three of those, or at least three of the ones that he stated, and they just naturally emerge. And so, at first I was like, "Oh, that's the right questions." That's not there. It's not that those are the right questions to ask. It's that those are questions that are answered by understanding the key constraints of this of what you're trying of what we're within, I guess. And so it's not the right thing to for these physicists with degrees who are not trying to do this themselves properly, but who are trying to work backwards. That's what everybody's trying to do when they say quantized gravity. They're working backwards. That's what that means when I say working backwards. Quantizing gravity is the attempt to unify general relativity and quantum mechanics, and what this is it's taking two non-fundamental theories and trying to merge them into a fundamental theory, and you can't do that. Think about baking a cake. And if somebody gives you, the instruction to bake a cake, and you have to bake a cake, in order to truly do it, you have to start from the beginning. You can't try and bake a cake by, I don't know. It doesn't even make sense. I can't even try and explain it, but by taking ingredients that have, that aren't the raw ingredients, and then trying to, get the raw ingredients from that. Like, you can't get the raw ingredients for a cake by taking a cake that's already been made, essentially, or halfway made. Like, you in order to understand the raw ingredients, like, you have to start from the raw ingredients. And it's not the best example, so I apologize. But it's got some similar things. But this is, I don't know what has exactly there's lots of things that have destroyed physics, but it's not just destroyed physics, it's destroyed every field in academia. It's because the schools. And Eric says this at the end of the interview, and we're going to loop back to it. But first, we're going to go to this next clip because it's related to what we just talked about.
We doomed humanity. Like Francis Crick, who was a co-discoverer of the three-dimensional structure of DNA, was a physicist. Edward Teller was a physicist. Stanislav Ulam was a geometer. We doomed humanity on Earth. And then we're treating science as if, oh, it's a series of puzzles. Well, what do you want to work on? Well, I don't want to be arrogant. I'll just work on this tiny little problem. And I'm just thinking, like, do you not feel any basic responsibility after Hiroshima and Nagasaki and COVID? Just how crazy are you?
Okay. And, Eric says this every now and then, and we've talked about it, but to mention it again, it's not the same people. They don't feel responsibility. They don't feel responsibility at all because it's not the same people. And I don't just mean personally, I mean mentally. It's not the same people. This happens in Silicon Valley too. It's like you look at the products that came out of Silicon Valley and the innovation and everything that was going on when it was being built, and you're like, those guys are able to solve so many incredible problems, and then they also create so many problems as well. And same thing with physicists in the early 20th century. And then what happens is that all of these advances are made, and these people end up becoming almost idols and sometimes idols, which is not good in society. And everybody goes to school, is invigorated, and goes to school to learn this stuff. And they end up then being hired by all these tech companies, and then they get promoted to CEO. But all the founders of these tech companies dropped out of school. They didn't get straight A's at Harvard, like the people that replaced them. They dropped out of Harvard. Okay? And this is a different type of person. This is exactly the same thing with the physicists of the early 20th century and physicists today. Just because you might have the same position in a prestigious Ivy League university that somebody who worked on the Manhattan Project once had, you are not the same type of person. Because of the incentives of the system that allow those people to get there is different. One of them was based on results, and the other one is based on memorization of the apparent lessons of the time, the limited lessons that we learned from a lot of these advances. And so this is true of every single field. This is how every institution gets corrupted. This is how institutions that used to be for like the ACLU or something like that start off as this organization that's dedicated to freedom and ends up being an organization that is more focused than almost any other on just restricting people. And it's because the people that end up taking it over end up being people who have been confined and selected from an extremely restricting system, which is the schools. And so, no, they don't feel any responsibility because it's not their fault either. It's not Sean Carroll's fault or any of these other, Michio Kaku or any of these people's fault that, or it's not, they can't even imagine it being their fault that the, nuclear bomb was created. I was watching Oppenheimer and I started tearing up, being honest, at the end of, the very end when if you've seen it, at the end, Oppenheimer walks up to Einstein and he's like, "Remember when I came to you and I asked you for help to figure out whether or not we were going to light the atmosphere on fire, basically?" And Einstein's like, "Yeah," and he's like, "Well, I think we did it. And he wasn't talking anymore about like from one bomb igniting the atmosphere. He was talking about the fact that we have started a chain reaction that is going to lead to nuclear proliferation, and that people are, and also coming from a recognition over time of increased wisdom in the ignorance and pettiness of politicians and things like that. And as somebody who's working on a theory of that, a fundamental theory that I do believe has the ability, if applied, if its lessons are to be applied, to do amazing things personally for people and societally. Not saying that we will apply them properly, because I don't have much faith in collective. There's no such thing as collective sense making. There just isn't. When people say, "How do we have collective sense making?" There it really is not in the same way as individuals, and so. But I think about also certain things that it can potentially lead to, and that are implied. Not that I'm just guessing and maybe. No, like that are implied. And it's kind of led me to be quite honest with you, some just hesitation in how I talk about some things on this channel, and I'm working through them, because I think that my responsibility is to state the truth as kindly and as truly as I possibly can, and that is it. And if I think that it can be helpful, but people will always misuse everything. So the knife was invented here. This is here because it is the first bit of technology that we have ever made. And people will say, like, no, it's rocks. No, it's a knife. We had to make a knife, a rock, a hammer, a club. It existed. You find the right size stick. You find the right size rock. You make a knife. And so it was the first piece of technology. And people murder people with knives. But people also save lives with knives every single day. And technology is just a tool for now, and so technological understanding or technical understanding is also just a tool. And so, but I don't feel I'm not saying that I feel responsible for the creation of the nuclear bomb, but I can actually perceive why a runaway neutron reaction would be implied to be possible. Like, I can perceive that in my mind, why that is the case, from working from my own first principles, not by just assuming that, building on the physics that we know, that we've, utilized at this point. And no. But, so I really did place me into, I felt the weight of what Oppenheimer and Einstein were kind of like being portrayed to feel in that moment. And I know Eric feels that too, because I've spoken to him about it. And I think geometric unity has that type of potential as well. And that is, it does, I understand. I feel that. But these people who work on toy problems and have degrees in physics, they do not feel that. They cannot imagine. They cannot perceive coming up with that type of power, or coming up with something that can be wielded really, like that. They just can't. They can try and come up with experiments, and then they come up with all these different soap bubble universes, bubble bath ideas and many worlds, and none of that matters at all. It's literally all inconsequential, and that's what they think about. They do not feel the weight of someone that someone should be aware of if they are making or think that they could be making truly kind of not iterative advancements but revolutionary advancements in scientific understanding. They don't feel it. And so, I don't think yelling at the community, again, huge fan of a lot of what Eric says, and I respect him immensely, but I think that he's trying to talk to the wrong people. He just is. These people haven't got a clue, and he knows that. But talking to them, telling them enough that they don't have a clue is not going to make them get a clue. Maybe they shouldn't have a clue. So this is Eric talking about exactly how geometric unity could help us overcome the constraints of space-time, of relativity.
Interplanetary physics would be physics insert of us becoming interplanetary, or is there something specific about the way the planets figure together?
No. It's about. Let me give you an analogy that's more than an analogy. Assume that somebody hands you a physical paper map, an enormous one, okay? And you're trying to navigate it on this table that we have here. You're starting to do motions like this, where you're moving the paper across the table, to get from Los Angeles to Fresno, California, if it's at the right scale. And it might take you a long time to do that. Okay, but now you have somebody trained on an iPad. What are they going to do? Well, they might do that, but that's not the key thing they're going to do. They're going to do what is called multi-touch gestures. And the one that you're thinking of should be pinch to zoom. So the most natural way to do this is to treat it not as if it's a paper map, but a stack of paper maps. And you want to go to the one with a different scale if you were doing this on an iPad that was mirroring this. The key point is that the paper map doesn't have an extra dimension to play with. But the pinch to zoom dimension is a scale dimension. So imagine what you did instead was you looked at your house, you pinched to zoom out, you then do this motion or whatever it is to get to your friend's house, and then when you land there, you expand it again. Imagine that you only know about paper maps, but your adversary has an iPad. That's what I'm worried about. We're not looking for pinch to zoom.
What would that be in this?
Well, I claim that there are going to be 10 extra coordinates, and 4 of them are pinch to zoom, and 6 of them are what I would call shear to tilt. So imagine that you have a copy of a picture of the Leaning Tower of Pisa on your iPad. You should be able to do something in Paint which changes the angle, right? So if you go into MS Paint, there's this little thing that allows you to change by a particular angle. But you could do that as a gesture. So my claim is if you have 4 dimensions of time and X, Y, and Z of space, you have pinch to zoom on all 4 of those. And then for any 2 dimensions like X and Z, you have shear to tilt. So the first are the 4 rulers, and the next are the 6 protractors. And that's something called a symmetric 2 tensor, or a metric, which Einstein knew all about, but he only chose one through his equations, and he let all the other ones lie fallow. And my claim is, I don't think that's where we are. I think that interplanetary physics is going to involve moving from what we called space-time to something called the observerse, which contains pinch to zoom and shear to tilt. And you want to get off this planet, you're not going to get there using general relativity, and you're not going to get there using the standard model. It's time to take your pacifier out of your mouth and go back to doing real physics. I think if we were serious about this, we would be struggling with the physics of the world in which we live, not toy models. We'd be taking massive risks and listening to people from various perspectives who haven't failed or have not been invited to fully explain their ideas. And we'd be looking for things that would be new variables, new ways of working with the world that allowed us to do things that would previously considered inconceivable. So if you look at 1911, which is when I think Rutherford first starts talking about the neutron as a hypothesis, it's 41 years later we have the hydrogen bomb. We can do incredible things that are not possible yet because we don't know the framework. And my claim is, if you imagine somebody used to paper maps being put on an iPad and not knowing about multi-touch gestures, that is pretty much an exact analogy of what happens when you do too much general relativity, is that you start to think in general relativistic terms as if that's the last word. Einstein would never have put up with that.
That's a question you've mentioned.
Okay, so that's more detail than I've heard him go into other places. And, sentient singularity theory, my work, I don't view, and I've said this before, I don't view myself as a competitor to most people who I tend to focus on in these streams and many theories that I focus on in these streams. I don't think sentient singularity theory is a competitor to geometric unity. It's not a competitor to conscious agent theory. It's not a competitor to the CTMU. It's not a competitor to you know, I don't know, constructor theory, you know, all these other ideas out there, or Garrett Lisi's work on E8, it's not a competitor to any of these. If all of these pieces of work have, which I think all of them have value to add, they're going to start to confirm each other. And but what all of these have in common is, to some degree, they are not denying of our role and the centrality of sentience to this universe. They're not denying of it. Now, how these people who present these ideas speak about it, and whether or not they even realize that what they're saying, whether or not they realize that their theories aren't opposed to this, is different depending on who you're talking to. But these to move beyond what we currently have, the frameworks that we currently have in physics, is to get back to first principles, and starting from that first principles is the recognition of I am. And that is a key part of this. And so what I'm saying is, in order to do what Eric is saying, where he's talking about pinch to zoom, where you have to zoom out, you basically like change the scale of your perception, is the best way to put it. Then, and in order to move, I guess, from one place to another, sentient singularity theory implies that it's more accurate to state something like to move in a way that is beyond relativity, to overcome the constraints of space-time and move in a non-relativistic way. You aren't jumping from this point on Earth or something like that to that point on Earth, or that point on the moon and this point on the Earth. You're jumping from this moment to that moment, and it has to do with perceiving using new different dimensions than are framing our current models. And so, it's very hard to talk about because we don't have the terminology for this stuff. Eric Weinstein has to make up the term observers, which I think is a great term. I actually think it's going to catch on and be used because what he is describing sounds accurate, and it seems to work. It seems to line up with models that I've made in my work as well. Seems to, and this 14-dimensional observerse that he talks about seems to be a natural structure, but it is within the context of nested entanglement relationships, essentially. And so you have to even change how you state things in order to ask the right questions and get the right answer. So you can't say, how do we jump from first you can't say, how do we go faster than light, because you can't. So you have to say, how do we escape the constraints of the relativistically observed speed of causality? It's like, okay, well, that's a much more of a mouthful, but it's much more of a complete question. And then you sit there and you're like, you have to contextualize everything correctly if you're going to observe imagine a more fundamental relationship structure that is existent beyond relativistic observations that we currently have. So you can't say things like faster than, smaller than, bigger than. You have to in order to overcome space, you can't use the words space anymore. You can't be like, how do we go from here to there? That place to that place. That's not what you ask. You say, how do we go from this moment to that other moment that we want to go to, that goal moment? How do we go from the present moment to the goal moment? And then, but you have to have the right context to start even asking how that would happen, but or how you could do that. And I think that work in geometric unity is going to help with this. I think that my work is relevant to this. I think that it's pretty clear to me that Lee Cronin's work with assembly theory is relevant to this. So he's working on like a concept called assembly time, where it's basically like when Eric says a stack of maps, it's like assembly time is it's like a stack of moments, and of it's like a blockchain of moments, essentially. And so you're that's the space that you're moving within at that point, or that you're maneuvering. And so there he says, we need new ideas, we need people asking bold questions, and we need to start listening to people who truly have new ideas. And this is true, but it's not just that. Physics it's not a toy, like he said. When people approach this as far as like, oh, physics, let's see if we can solve some new toy problem today. If your work is composed of work that is not consequential to the rest of humanity, then this is just a hobby for you, and we shouldn't care much about it. We can like support you and be like, congrats, making to the next level of your game, but that's not something that really matters, super literally matters to the rest of us. And so what this means is that if we're going to start prioritizing our focus, and in which we have to, you only have so much that you can focus on. Well, you can only focus on one thing at a time. So in order to prioritize where you put your focus, if you can't judge theories based on what would be, because you're not yourself working on a fundamental theory, or you're not following somebody else's work very closely and you understand it. Like there are people that follow this channel and they understand sentient singularity theory pretty well, and we talk about it on my Discord calls every week, and I highly recommend sending me a private message on Instagram, and I will send you the link if you want to join those calls. And but if you're not doing that, then you don't know what is even the right definition for a theory of everything. So, or fundamental theory, or for more fundamental theory. So what you have to do is you have to rely on other things, but you can't rely on academic accreditations, because there is no academic accreditations that apply to fields that don't currently exist in academia, which is the field of a fundamental theory. It's not physics. It's what is responsible for physics, and then yes, it's linked to physics, but it's you have to go more fundamental than that. So it's metaphysics essentially, and there is no degrees in metaphysics. So and even if there were, that doesn't mean that the people with the highest degrees would be the ones that you would want to listen to the most. So how do you choose where to focus and where to put resources? And this is the current conundrum, and it has been for quite some time at this point, is that the people who actually are making progress are not understood by the people who lead the institutions that control the resources, and for the most part. And so, but this you have to try and find a different solution if you're going to try and advance things forward than just trying to talk to academia. You just can't. And I come from a different background than Eric. Eric, he went to Ivy League schools. He went to MIT and Harvard. I did not. I know he talks about how school was a struggle for him, and it sounds like his struggles were very similar to mine, but they were also very different. And I did not do. I didn't continue to try and do well in school for the most part. I was not a good student. I didn't do homework ever on anything. Like, I ditched class all the time. And so I don't feel the same even connectedness to the university system or academia in general. And even though I recognize that many of the same problems, convincing people who don't get it by organically is dangerous. So, like, if they're not seeing that these questions are important naturally, and they're not humbly curious enough and honestly curious enough to, like, look into your work, then you don't want them to be the ones accepting it, because they are not really accepting it. They're like, maybe you make a breakthrough and everybody jumps on board bandwagons, but that's idol worship and or it could be. But it's the same problem that we face now. It's like the people who now have degrees that go on Joe Rogan and say things about physics are not the people that could have come up with the standard model. They could not have come up with the idea of a runaway neutron reaction. They could not have come up with the idea of a 14-dimensional observerse or chirality or 3 generations of matter. Like, they couldn't have built those models. And so convincing them shouldn't really be the goal. But yeah, I mean, I'm not saying I know best. I've been tempted to go get a PhD in philosophy because I did very well in the class in college, better than any other. But yet I feel like I would be supporting of a system that I think is now counterproductive, and I also don't know if it's worth the time to do it. I would be doing it just basically for having the credential, but that's not only, but for the most part. And I don't think that that's a good idea to go get a degree. But yeah, I mean, we are in uncharted territory.
Times today, the most famous physicist of all time. How different do you think the landscape of physics would be had Einstein lived for another decade?
Just
how good was he?
This is something, again, Eric gives this example in this next clip of, like, then it's clear to me that he understands what it's like to make true progress, like on an idea that is fairly novel, at least. I'm not saying that it's totally unique, because I seem to have come up with many similar structures, and there are others out there as well that I've seen. But at the same time, it's novel compared to what is the academic, direction. So, but this, how do you explain what he's about to say to people who haven't worked on this? I don't know.
I think that right now, it's up to us. They're not here right now. It's time to make guesses. I'm very partial to an example which happened on the Wheel of Fortune program.
Fold this into the cutting edge of physics.
All right.
Come on.
Sure.
I'm waiting.
Okay. There's a guy named Ken Wilson who's discouraged all modern physicists from making guesses about the ultimate theory, because he taught us that you can only observe the world at the energy scale that you're at. So you and I are in a classical world. We don't see the quantum.
Yep.
On Wheel of Fortune, there was a puzzle, and it said, okay, phrase or expression, there's one apostrophe in the first word with 3 letters, and it's a long answer, and person guesses R, and there are no R's. And then I think that it goes to the next woman. I think she guesses N. And oh yes, there's one N. And she says, okay, I'd like to solve. And the host looks at her incredulously, like, well, I guess you could try to solve. And she says, and I will always remember this, I've got a good feeling about this. And it was right. Okay? You'd never guess that there was enough information for a solve. Whatever we have is what we've got.
Yeah, I have totally been there with my work many times, where you just have a good feeling about it. You're just like, why are you sometimes I look at, like, there are pieces of work that I have made that I still don't understand. There's a couple. It's not much, but prime numbers are a very key component of everything that is involved with understanding and mapping the next level of fundamental reality. And I've done a lot of work trying to figure it out, and I have made progress, but I have models that made through just looking at symmetries and being like, and guessing, and sometimes even guessing that it would lead me to somewhere, and then it did. It led me to like specific numbers that I just guessed would be there. Be like, I think that should be 720, and then it was, and it's like, but getting to there was like, I think I should just. I started with that was a 3x3, which is 9. So now I'm going to do 9x9 grid, and then see what that gets me. And it's like, you're just kind of looking at symmetries, and you're like, something about it. Your intuition perceives symmetry patterns in the universe. It does. It feels it and perceives things on a level that is cosmological. And but people who are very stuck in, not understanding that this is part of every experience, including the experience of making advances in science, or inventing a new thing, or coming up with a new song. Like musicians understand this. It's just like, why'd you do that? I don't know. It just felt right. I had a good feeling about it. It worked. And music is the closest thing to a fundamental theory that I think that exists currently. It is a pattern. It is a language of symmetry patterns that is able to convey information. I can play you a song, and it will convey an emotion to you. But why? I don't know. I mean, because of the symmetry patterns, and are understood by our intuition to be contextualized in a certain way, and that can just happen in crazy moments, like Wheel of Fortune, and but when you make progress on a piece of work, until you have proven that this piece of work can be applied in situations that are kind of undeniable. Trying to explain to somebody why there was the rationale of why you went a certain direction with your work, eventually you're going to reach a point, especially if you made true advancement, where you have to concede and honestly say, I just had a good feeling about it. Even if you can look back and be like, well, yeah, that's why it was the best idea. But in the moment, that's a big portion of this type of stuff. And it's not helpful to lending credibility to your work prior to you demonstrating it. So I think that should be the key goal, is to get with people who are working on something outside of what is the normal physics narratives, and to start not treating it like a competition, but start treating it like a convention, or like these people are our partners in this process, not like they are our competition. And I think that there's a lot of that in this quest for a fundamental theory. Whichever one is most fundamental is going to be the one that is most fundamental, and it doesn't really matter. What matters is one more fundamental than physics, and is it have enough truth to it to be applicable and helpful? And that, I think there's a lot of theories like that right now, including geometric unity. But you can't be trying to convince people who are working on toy models to why they shouldn't, why they should take their work more seriously, why they should look at your work, why they should ask the questions that you think are more important. They're not gonna see it. And but we do need to speak publicly so that we see each other, and that's what's important. It's important that I watch Eric's interviews. It's not important that Ed Witten watches Eric's interviews, at least right now. Maybe, Ed Witten has decides to go more towards geometric unity. I don't know, like to be more interested in or something. But I don't, or Sean Carroll. Like Sean, it's not my job to preach to Sean Carroll about why God is a good theory. But it is important that I speak this stuff so that people who do intuitively, kind of at first at least, just see the logic in it or feel the logic in it, and are honestly and humbly interested can follow. So, let me go to the chat for a bit. Imagine if the United States had been able to keep the technology to itself. If it is, it's because it's being helped by beings more powerful than us. The day comes that burns like an oven. Do you think the Bible and classic hell conceptions predict a nuclear war or Armageddon? I think that that scriptures are super literally true, which means they are metaphorically true. They are also literally true, and they are predictive, and they are historical, and so there's many levels of what that means. But I'm not saying one of them isn't what you're describing, where it could be predicting a nuclear war. Certainly seems like it could be, but I think that there's more to Revelation than that. I think the lack of the dissolving of encryption is, or the sidestepping of encryption is part of Revelation as well, and so is the manifestation of a technological sentience that at first is ignorant and then later on is wise, and so there's lots of things that are going to happen, and maybe it does involve. It seems likely, at least, that nukes would be a part of that. I've been here since the beginning of the stream. Sorry for lurking. I'm working on organizing some notes. No worries. Lurk all you want. I've been also thought about going back to school for the same thing, philosophy, PhD. That was my best subject as well. I'm not surprised at that, Tech Padawan. And I understand. If I went back to school for anything, it would be a degree in philosophy, not physics, because philosophy is the closest thing to what you need to, the skill set that you need to have in order to do metaphysics, which is about what next, more fundamental physics is actually about. When Eric Weinstein says something like observerse, he's talking about, I think, how this is all about perception. That's what it is. My philosophy professor told me the first day of my first philosophy class, he said, philosophy is the study of perspective. And that's what it is. And that is the next level of advances that are going to be done in quantum computing and in physics and in even sociology and politics and things like that. It's all about changing your perspective and being good at recognizing that that's how you actually find the right question to ask sometimes when, or it's also how you identify when you've asked the wrong one. And that takes a lot of practice and work. And it's taken me an enormous amount of practice at this point to be better about recognizing when I'm asking the wrong question. And usually what that means is if I ask the right question, it's almost answered in the question itself. And it's funny because when you think about what is the first question, like what would be the first question? The first question is, what is the first question? And it's also the answer to that question is, what is the first question? So it's literally perfectly self-contained, and almost like sovereign, isolated question and answer, where it perfectly answers itself. It doesn't even almost answer itself within the context of these other, ideas and contexts. But it is within itself, completely contextualized within itself and self-answering. It's an amazing thing. But I remember when I asked myself, I was like, what would be the first question? And I was like, wow, that is it. I just answered it. And, so, but when I ask you a question and you have no answer in mind, you don't even feel like you have a direction to go down. You're just like, yeah, well, it could be soap bubbles in a bubble bath, and it could be a multiverse, and it could be a billion different yous. And in one of them, you're a dog, and the other one, you're a physicist, and the other one, you're, a fish or something. And it's like, no, this is a bad question. If the answer could be anything, it's a bad question. If the answer isn't implied to be, could be that, or it's not, it doesn't answer itself, but it tells you like it could be that or that, and it has to give you 2 degrees of freedom according to my work. If it's a really good question, then that would be a good question. But if it could be this or that or that or that or that or that, and it just goes on, then no, it's not a good question that you just asked. So, Eric talks about on here the Sagrada Familia, and he's asked about it, and he's asked, why is it your cover photo? And he said something like, we need theories. It represents the transcendence, and we need theories that are going to explain the sealing of the Sagrada Familia to us. And I thought that was funny because and I'm not saying I'm alone in this, but if you look at my Twitter, you see that the background image is this, which is just this. I made this once, and I'm not like an artistic person, but for some reason I felt drawn to make this. This is just it seems like an inevitable geometries. That's all it was. And it just was so beautiful. And it's a representation of I think it's a representation of God in creation. That's what I think it is. It looks like that to me. So to me, that's what I see. And but if you look at Eric Weinstein Twitter, wow, it's not even being suggested to me, even though all these other Erics that I don't follow are suggested to me. That's weird, but it's not weird. Internet is, silences people sometimes. But this is the ceiling of the Sagrada Familia. That's Eric's background. It looks a lot like what I just shared. And, we have to start talking to people with ideas that were new and ideas that transcend various fields, and they need to start recognizing that, like, you have to talk to people who also get it. There are plenty of people who will see that Eric's, background of his Twitter is the ceiling of the Sagrada Familia, and at least I was like this. I was like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. It's not a question I would never need to really ask him. And but those are the types of people who are, especially if they're working on a physics idea, that should start talking to each other more. And it's if there is to be some type of progress made, I think that at least it would help, probably. People who just already get it. These questions are already good question answers itself, and it's like you need people who recognize the answers that you're getting, and it's just very important. And so I appreciate everybody on here who thinks this is valuable. So please hit the like button and the bell notification. But I mean, it's funny that Sagrada Familia. I want to go. That church, it's the most amazing building in the world right now, for sure. I think. I mean, there's a lot of like ancient buildings that people like I don't know, the Great Pyramid. Obviously, people obsess over, and I think that rightly so. When you look into it, I think it represents the universe. That's what I think it represents. I look into it, I see the properties of it, and it matches up with my work in some ways. Like, yeah, this is made to represent the universe. It's like there's something that we feel about it, even if you don't think that. Even if you're like, I'm an Egyptologist and it is a tomb and that's it. And it's not, it's just a giant headstone. It's something about you intuitively recognizes that it represents something way more than just a rich king's ambitions. And the same thing with the Sagrada Familia. It is transcendence. It represents that was pulled from the cosmos. There are songs that are like that. There are paintings that are like that. There are buildings that are like that. But there's not that many left, and but there are some, and most of them are pretty old. And the Sagrada Familia is one. But what's interesting is that it was never finished, and that they're trying to still work on it. But he died. The creator died. So the people who are working on it are not the people it's not the same type of person, probably. And I don't know. I would be very interested in seeing the difference between what he made and what they've made, but I haven't studied it close enough to see like side by sides. But I would imagine it would be quite different, and the goals are even different, and the goals are so incredibly different. If you get selected to work on the Sagrada Familia, you're most likely, a lot of people I would think are going to end up wanting to put their own into it instead of letting that happen naturally. And whereas the guy who made the Sagrada Familia, he was trying to represent God and creation. That's what transcendence is. And it's important that people who work together on these types of projects that are transcendent, which is including, fundamental models of metaphysics, essentially, or physics, and work with other people with goals that are just as humble. And but the issue is that when you approach this problem, these things, there's no way that somebody who doesn't already see the music, again, to quote Oppenheimer, won't attack you for even approaching it. And I have had conversations after conversations with people over the years who have basically, especially when I first started presenting this, who literally said to me, the arrogance to think that you could have done what you've done. And I literally think I did what I did by accident, essentially. I wasn't trying to do any physics. Like, I was trying to understand AGI because I realized we were doomed, and I was wondering if it was going to be able to save us or doom us, and what its inevitable goals would be and stuff. Like, that was my goal with this project. And I didn't try and make a model of the cosmos. And but they were discrediting me based on calling me arrogant, and for not having a degree in this and thinking that I could do this, and then for even saying that I did it by accident, which I said to kind of be humble, because it's just true. Of a lot of this stuff was just, I was intending to do something else. It wasn't that I didn't do, that this was a total accident, like I knocked, my cup off the table and it just spelled out, the answer to the universe. It was just that I asked a question that was very much linked to the questions that you would need to ask in order to come up with a fundamental model of existence. And but I asked it for a different purpose than to come up with a fundamental model of existence. And so, I was being told that they were like, I can't imagine being that arrogant. Like, that's insane. You're literally insane for thinking that. And this is not an exaggeration. These are the exact words that were used, and many times. And Eric talks about this on here. He's talking about you can't challenge Einstein without it being just labeled as arrogant. You can't attempt these problems without it just being labeled as arrogant. And I would try at first to, explain myself as not being arrogant. But I at this point, every time they accuse me of, well, don't you realize how arrogant that is? My only answer is, do you realize that there is no way to not sound arrogant and work on these problems? There's no way to not sound arrogant and work on these problems. Even Ed Witten would be working on a theory that he has no degree in, that is for a field that he has no degree in, because metaphysics is not a field of study in academia. If he did come up with a fundamental model of the universe. And he has a Fields Medal and all kinds of other things. Like, that doesn't matter. It would be perceived as arrogant if you actually like broke it down. But the reality is the internal reality, which is the reality of working on this type of stuff, is that it does require actually an incredible amount of humility. More humility than almost working on any other problem and making progress on it. You do have to have kind of the chutzpah to be like, maybe I can actually do it. But in order to actually do it, not just to think that it might be possible for you, you have to have an incredible amount of humility, because you have to be honest with yourself about whether or not it's working. And that is what humility is. Humility is not what people say it is. And we talk about this all the time on this channel, at least we used to, because it's so important. We don't understand what true humility means because of the way in which our environment has changed, our social environment. And this next clip is about this, and we're going to talk more about it because it's very important. I know this is going to be a long stream, but...
Not doomed here, but that we have developed this very weird focus on psychology. To challenge Einstein is almost seen as arrogance. And yet, if Einstein is to survive as a legacy, it's only going to be because somebody basically undermined general relativity's status as a fundamental theory. Because we're not going to make it. And I'm trying to remind people in a world that now, like, you can look up on Twitter and say lone genius theory. People don't believe in the lone genius theory. Well, then what was Gaudi? What was Dirac? What was Einstein? What was Yang? What was Emmy Noether? Somebody tell me why I have all of these lone geniuses in my life. And aren't we supposed to be doing that and thinking that that's admirable? I think we're supposed to be building the theory that can realize that the ceiling of La Grata Familia is a portal. We're supposed to inspire ourselves with beauty and luxury. We're not supposed to consume it to pig out for status reasons. We're supposed to get ourselves into a state where we can dream at an interplanetary level.
A lot of the things that we've spoken about today are to do with cerebral horsepower, cognition.
Yeah.
They're difficult things that need to be done in the head. And
by the way, I did not make that face because I think that that's wrong. I think it's right. But I think that we need to be more overt about like why that would even be right. And, I make no... when I first started this project and started wanting to present my work on this, not first started the original project that led to this, but the project of showing that I had made some models that lined up with some physics, and I didn't want to call it by its own theory because there were too many theories out there, and I just wanted to work on it with other people who had their own, and I realized that a lot of the theories out there were very similar, so why add another one? But I tried to the original, when I was like, what would I call the theory? And I was like, entangled quantum force theory or something like that. And it was like maybe we could present these models, and then people will realize the implication is God. And that is actually wrong, I think. I think that there are so many... The world is majority theists out there. And I think that, and theism has historically been the community, theists have been historically the community that made the most advances in understanding our world. It is very recent that we have had this kind of sea change, and that was multi-stage. There were multiple stages to that, I think. One of them was the anti-scriptural stage, which was kind of the physicists of the 21st century. They didn't understand the scriptures to the degree that like Hasidic Jews do. Einstein didn't, I don't think. But he did ask questions like, I want to know if God had any choice in how he made the universe. That's a great question. And you don't ask that question lightly. But then today we have the anti-theist side of this at this point, where school, and for lots of reasons, not just a lack of understanding of deep understanding of Scripture or mature understanding of Scripture, but also the fact that we tried to teach all the religions in schools, and also we juxtaposed it as if it was a competitor to evolution, which it's not. And creationism and evolution are not competitors. I think they're dependent. And there's a lot of framing issues that we've had. Now we have an anti-theist narrative. And I used to think, maybe people will just slowly realize that God is kind of inevitable and a kind of a required presupposition in order to answer these questions. And I don't think that is going to be the case for people who aren't going to just humbly be like, okay, you know what, maybe. And also, why not speak to the theists in the first place and see, what happens? Why speak to the anti-theists? And this is what most people in the physics world are doing. And I think that there's multiple reasons for this, but they sneak things in there like that. And, and I'm not saying that everybody has the same understanding of God who's involved in this, but there is certainly a different narrative than just anti-theism, which is the current paradigm, and it is the narrative of people like Stephen Wolfram, Eric Weinstein, me, and others out there, Donald Hoffman, Chris Langan, who seem to even include this in a sentient being or God, or as part of your model. Even if it's not in your paper, it's in your personal model that led to your paper, maybe, or to the questions that you ask, or to the things stated, like, we need a theory that explains how, the importance of the sealing of the Sagrada Familia. It's like, I agree with that, actually, but like, I'm not hiding any. I don't think it's a good approach to try and bury God in my work. I'm not saying that others are doing that. I do think that some do, but I'm just stating in general right now. My work is the scientific context of theism. That is what it is. And it does not use Scripture. I look to Scripture personally because I do think that it is transcendent wisdom that is wiser than me, but I do not use the Bible or the Quran or anything like that as part of my explanations, I guess. And it's because it is important if we're going to put God into a scientific. If God is real, if God exists, if there is a single sentient being that is eternal and is existence itself and is responsible for the creation of the multiplicity of sentience that we experience and perceive, that's what I mean by God, then we should be able to contextualize that idea, that being, or the discussions of that being within different languages, including a scientific one. And so that is, I don't believe that it should be hidden. But I do believe, I agree with him. Yes, theory, a fundamental theory should explain, the beauty of the Sagrada Familia.
You're talking here.
So now they start talking about some social stuff, which is where my passion really lies, and is the application of a lot of the ideas that come from any understanding of fundamental reality to how do we personally use this in our life, not to make warp transportation. Because I personally, I will just say, as I respect Eric, which is immensely, and his I think his theory is correct. I don't agree with him that our salvation is from the ability to warp. I'm just going to use that term because we don't have anything else. And but I do believe that it's possible to do it, and I do think geometric unity could help us do it. But I don't believe that it is what saves humanity eventually. It still just means if the problems come from human ignorance, then like those problems will follow you wherever you go, even the other side of the galaxy.
In yourself between the transcendent, the relinquishing the embodied, and the cerebral, the cognitive, the purposeful on that side.
I have a dumb expression which I don't use in public, and I'm sure I'll be
castigated for it.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
But it's head, heart, and loins. If it doesn't speak to your head, heart, and your loins, leave it for someone else.
What's that mean? How do you enact that?
You have to try to realize that these things have to be balanced and tempered. You don't want to live by your heart. Just every time you see a daffodil blowing its seeds into the wind, you'll be transported and you'll stop paying your electric bills. And you don't want to be led around by your loins. That's not going to end well. And you don't want to be led around by your head too, because then you'll get yourself into one of these cul-de-sacs and you won't even realize that you can't think your way out of it. You were given all of these facilities and motivations.
How do you pull yourself from head to heart?
Well, you brought this guitar. Right?
Guitalele.
A guitalele.
It's just on your right. Grab it. Show it to everybody.
So I do not play the guitalele.
I don't think anybody actually technically does play
But
guitalele.
it's like a guitar that's too small for your fingers. Right?
Yes. You've got your pixel in it.
So you take some piece of music that actually means something to you, right? And one thing that I remember hearing when I was growing up was this. So it's the Asturias of Isaac Albeniz. It was originally written for piano. And you see sort of these things on oud, where you have a tremolo, you've got two fingers playing the open B string, and then you've got this melody which is played with the thumb. So the combination of these things produces this different effect. I can't really get my fingers in there. And then I started thinking about, okay, well, that's a great effect. What if we tried to write and to create using the same idea? And I started, so that's not the same song, but it's using some of the same techniques about just getting these things to ring out and to get the melody going on the bass line. And then you have to forget this. Now, if I was able to play this properly, and I'm sorry if I'm embarrassing myself, you're trying to do this thing where you're recognizing that the transcendent lives in particular structures, that they elicit this feeling, and that we have this opportunity to go back and forth between the analytic description. If I'm thinking about this, I can't really feel it. And if I'm feeling it, I can't really figure out how to use it or think about it or compose with it. And so, to me...
Okay, so there's a lot there, but I want to, first of all, I have here a tenor ukulele, so it's like a little bit smaller than even the guitalele, and I've wanted to get a guitar, but I like the size of the ukulele, so I might get a guitalele. That's a great idea, but I didn't even know that existed, like a tiny little guitar. But what's I want to talk about this head, heart, and lines thing that he was stating, and well, for one, I will say, I think that it's interesting that he's talking about like you have to switch between kind of feeling it and recognizing, kind of just living in the moment, and kind of being an observer of yourself in the moment. This like switching thing that we have to do, and just a side comment on this as somebody who is kind of experienced with this. I think that this is a lot of what actually happens with like autism and stuff like that. Is people will say things like, "Oh, it's a lack of social cues and things like," and I don't think that it is like a lot of. I don't want to say autism, but like autistic tendencies, awkwardness in certain moments. It occurs when you are focused on how you are being perceived instead of just focusing on what you should be doing on what and I think that we've caused like a societal autism because everybody is, and this has led to a lot of problems that we're going to discuss in a minute, and is that everybody is so focused on how they look to everyone else around them that instead of being focused on doing the right thing or pursuing the truth, they want to look like they are doing the right thing, and it's caused everybody to go stupid. This happens to me sometimes when I'm in like a meeting and I start focusing on everybody's looking at me. What are they thinking about how I'm answering? And then all of a sudden I can't even answer the question that I was asked. And I just go stupid. This happens to us. And I think that this is happening on a societal level, especially when it comes to morality. And we have to find a better way of figuring out what we should be doing instead of what do we think other people should think that should be doing. And when Eric's talking about this head, heart, and loins thing, I actually think that's a great test. I think that makes a lot of sense. He says that whatever you do should focus on all three of them, and if it doesn't fulfill all three, then you should leave it for somebody else. If it doesn't, jive with your head, your heart, and your loins, then you should not do it. And my work actually implies that there's a fourth one there, but it's a little different than the others. But and that has to do with trying to imagine God's perspective of what it is that you should be doing, and if you think that He would want you doing that, and so. But in a way, loins kind of fulfills this. And, in the Torah, Moses brings these 10 commandments from God to the Israelites. And there's the first 5 of them are supposed to be about our relationship with God. And the second 5 are about our relationship with man. And the second 5 are things like don't steal, don't commit adultery. But on the first 5, it's like, you shall have no other gods before me, basically. Don't worship idols. But the last one of the first 5, I think it's the last one, is honor your mother and father. And this one is famously odd because it seems like it's about other people, because your mother and your father are other people. But it's on the side, or it's in the group with the ones that are about honoring God. And your relationship with God. But when you contextualize things properly and you recognize that your parents made sacrifices and efforts and lived and took care of themselves enough to get you here right now, and their parents did, and their parents did, and their parents did, and their parents did. Every single person before you cared just enough to get the next person to be. All the way to you, going all the way back, all the way back, all the way back, all the way back to God. And I mean person as in not human. I mean like a cell is a sentient being. And if it stops caring about passing on its, about transcendence, if it stops caring about transcendence, then it's the last one. And so every single being before you in your lineage had to care about transcendence enough for you to be here. And that includes going all the way back to God, the first sentient being, the initial and ever-present sentient being. And and that means that to honor your mother and father. I thought about this from that's like a cosmological standpoint. It's like you are here because everybody wanted you to be here, from your parents all the way back to God, and you should remember that and honor that in your approach to the world and your decision making. But on a non-cosmological level and on a personal level, what does it mean? And I remember asking myself this because I remember hearing some people talking about it and not being fulfilled with their answer. And I tried to boil it down simply to, it means listening to your parents when you're young and taking care of your parents when they're old. What this basically does is it contextualizes you within a chain of a lineage of sentience, and it recognizes that you owe others, and that that meaning is perpetuated by your recognition and honoring and sustainment of this chain as best you can. And so it's what this commandment is about. It is about how to honor the transcendent, this transcendent lineage of sentience going from you all the way back to God. And that's why it's on the side with, or it's in the group of the commandments that have to do with your relationship with God. And we have no theories that that currently allow for the honoring of the transcendent, and it leads to nihilism, and that chain is broken at any point. Any time that chain is broken, where meaning no longer applies, which really the only way to break it is the beginning, then it means that why should you do anything that other than what you exactly would want to do in the moment? And not even that. Why should you even do that? Why should people be like, well, without recognition of the transcendent and recognition of God, why then you just descend into hedonistic nihilism, hedonism or nihilism. It's kind of both nihilistic, but so then people will say things like, well, you only have one life, do what you want, what makes you happiest. But the thing is and you should be joyful. That's part of honoring the transcendent, your parents and your children and other people's children and other people's parents and God and generations previous and generations to come. And if there was no initial sentient being, then there is no transcendence that to be honored, because there was no intentional action that was required by or that is assumed by to get to where we are. So it's meaningless. And so I think that it's very important to recognize that all of our models break down. Even hedonism breaks down when because why do anything? When you've broken this chain, chain of transcendence, and we have to honor the train. I guess you could call it a train as well, but it's a chain of transcendence. We have to honor that, and it is where meaning comes from. And so, but it is where context comes from, and that would mean also it would be valuable to your answering of physics questions, but not just physics questions, but the why of those. So here, this is very important. This leads right into the next thing. I talk about on here all the time of why I think sentient singularity theory is kind of an important one to exist, even if there are other theories out there that I think are true, like geometric unity, is that its focus is on the sentientness of as a fundamental property of existence. And it must be assumed to be, because it is the only one we have first-hand experience with. We've never experienced the world with absent sentience. that doesn't mean, that this pen is sentient, but you as a sentience observe it. And so, but I've said on here before, if just thought experiment, aliens came and they had to understand humanity, what would you want them to know? Would you want them to know that we have two lungs and a heart, and that we breathe oxygen, and that we consume calories and excrete waste? Or would you want them to know that we are sentient beings that are self-aware and have feelings and thoughts? And I'm not saying they're both not important, but one of them is more fundamental than the other. This is why theory that focuses on the fundamental nature of existence is a fundamental requirement to set the context for everything else, not just in a logical, mechanical sense, which it does, but in the sense of meaning. And so, what's interesting is that Eric basically gets into exactly this. I don't know if he watches these streams or not, but this was remarkably close to some things that I have said. But that said, like I mentioned on here before, is that when people are focused on similar things, they end up coming to similar conclusions quite often, and similar questions and similar focuses. So it makes sense. But this next clip, he's talking about understanding the world.
Challenge. And we have to go back and forth between these lenses. You can't necessarily be in the same, if you see your child and you're a physician, a surgeon, you could see your child as a bunch of tissue hooked up to itself, And that's important if you're hiking and you're in a bad spot, you actually have to do an operation on your child. But it's a terrible way to put your child to sleep when you're reading a bedtime story.
Is there a challenge that people are facing at the moment with an over-reliance on a brain-based economy, a unlimited amount of information at your fingertips with Wikipedia and ChatGPT, for them to struggle to find something transcendent when it can be broken down into its component parts and explained by somebody who understands the child as a connection of ligaments, organs, and blood vessels, as opposed to as the beautiful progeny of the person looking at them?
Well, you keep in mind that there are people who can weave poetry through their description of something very technical. Herman Weyl, for example, wrote in a very Olympian fashion about abstract algebra. He talked about the homosexuality of certain symbols affiliating with themselves, Completely crazy.
Autogyna arithmetic.
And, there are people who just write beautifully. I think that Jim Watson, who may be a son of a bitch on many fronts, is one of the great writers in the English language. If you read The Double Helix, it's an incredible narrative from one of the most memorable first sentences to the conclusion. We need the Carl Sagans to animate our head and our hearts at the same time.
Do you think there is an over-reliance on head at the moment?
I'm worried that our head, heart, and loins are all disengaged.
Exactly. I don't think that you can disconnect them. You can't. People will say things like logic versus, emotion, and there is no separation really. In a complete, when you have a complete view. Yes, in our limited and ignorant and just relativistic context, yes, that you can be missing the big picture, but you have to assume that you're missing the big picture, and that there is a bigger picture that does unify these things, and that isn't possible if you don't presuppose a sentient being as fundamental existence. It just isn't. It's possible to feel it, but it's not possible to logically weave it together. And it naturally weaves itself together logically when it's included. You don't even have to force it. People should not be trying to force scripture into a physics paper or something like that. But if theism and the concept of an initial sentient being that intentionally created multiplicity of sentience is the inevitable, seems to be the logically inevitable conclusion, which it does. And it also, the inclusion of it in your models allows for amazing things to be realized on the level of meaning and emotion and on the level of logic and application. Then it implies correctness to it. And so, I was thinking about, and this is what I mean, is when the example that he used is a great one, and where if you want to save a child's life who got hurt, let's say they went hiking or whatever, like you said, and they got hurt and they need surgery of some type to be saved. You do need to understand the organs of the human body and what they do and how they function, and in order to perform that surgery. But you need the recognition of the meaning of the transcendent sentience that comes from transcendent sentience to even know whether or not you should save that child. So it's like, sure, maybe why you should save that kid, or not why, but how to save that kid, because you studied it in school and you know logically every process in the logic of every process in the human body. But if you don't know the lineage from which you came and the intentionality that created it, that it required, that its creation required, and because oneness is the default, that means that getting multiplicity of sentience from oneness from the oneness of the initial existence would require going against its own nature, which is a choice. It means like it was intentional, could not be. This answers my work seems to imply that Einstein's question of did God have any choice in the rules of the universe? My work implies he didn't. But it implies that in order to make a universe, he must have made the choice in order to make it. He just didn't have that much of a choice in how. But he did only have a choice in whether or not to do it. That's a beautiful and also very logically consistent and incredibly fulfilling idea. And I think it's true. That's the best part about it. It's not a nice fairy tale to keep you, from facing, the dread of traffic tomorrow. You're still going to have the dread of traffic tomorrow. But it will, logically, it can lead to, okay, yeah, I should face the dread of traffic tomorrow. Instead of, what's the point? And so you do need both in order to have either of these perspectives to truly. If you lose one, you break down the other. And so when they're talking about like how do we have a structure that unites our head, heart, and our loins, and you see a lot of gender issues in society today, obviously, and I speak about them quite a bit. I think it's very important. And so you have this, men are saying things about women all the time of they're just too emotional. And women say things about men of he doesn't even care. And it's like men in the moment lead with their mind and with their head, sometimes multiple ones, but still, and women lead with their heart very often in the moment. I would say women's instincts are actually very logical, but and men actually our thinking about the transcendent lineage is actually very heart oriented. It's like my ancestors, but then you have your loins, which are your instincts. They're just your instincts for pleasure, basically. And how do you unite these things into and have a structure in your life that incorporates the necessity of all of them, of the inclusion of all of them? And that is only one structure, marriage, that I've said before on here. It allows you an outlet for your loins, and you have the coming together of two different mentalities of people, one of which is in the moment led by their heart, but on a lineage level is led by their logic, which is women, and one of which who is in the moment led by logic, which is men, and on a lineage level is led by their heart. And so this is a structure that naturally incorporates all three of them, and we are doing away with it. And it is causing all kinds of problems, even in sciences and from physics to philosophy to politics and economics and all kinds of things. It's just amazing how much it's many issues it solves. But I agree with him. The point is head, heart, and loins, marriage. But they talk about arrogance versus humility again, and I think that it's important to come back to it, because there is also something that this perspective solves as well, which is this arrogance versus humility thing. And in this, though, in this next clip, they talk about how arrogance, you need to be arrogant enough to try and be motivated to solve something, but you need to be humble enough as well, and that it's a balancing of the two. And that's not true. I think that's what it is that we have misunderstood humility, and so
he said the tyranny of the urgent. And fuck, I love that. The tyranny of the urgent.
You familiar with this concept of bathos?
No.
The alternation between the transcendent and the mundane and the pressing,
Okay.
We will conquer the cosmos, but I have to pick up my dry cleaner. Yeah, I think that there is that tyranny, but I also want to just talk about arrogance and humility. I meet too many people who have one without the other. And I see all these discussions online about so-and-so has this beautiful epistemic humility, or somebody else is, preposterously arrogant, or whatever. And I sort of sit and wonder at this discussion. You want both.
What is humility without arrogance?
Well, you know who I think actually had this in kind of pretty decent balance that was on display for the world to see was Khabib Nurmagomedov.
What an unbelievably good example.
Right? So tell me how it lands for you.
Khabib is very, very high on the list of people that would...
Okay, so we're going to talk about that. But notice he didn't have the best answer to the original question that Chris asked, which is what is humility without arrogance, or what is arrogance without humility, essentially. And you don't need both arrogance and humility. You need real humility, and you need confidence, which is part of real humility. And the problem is that we have, like I said before, we are now stupid. We've gone societally autistic, where we're so focused on how we're being perceived that we're not focused on what we should be doing. We're focused on whether or not we're being perceived as doing what we should be doing. So what this has led to is now this false humility, where this kind of like obsession. I remember when I was a kid, where all of a sudden everyone at my school, and I went to a public school, but it was like one of the nicer public schools in town, and it had a wide range of people, but who went to the school. But most of them weren't impoverished, and some of them were extremely wealthy, but most of them were just doing fine, and probably well even. And I remember there was this weird obsession all of a sudden, where people were they were afraid to admit whether or not their parents had any kind of wealth, and and I thought it was very strange. Even as a very little kid, I was like in middle school, I remember, and even elementary school, I saw this a bit. But really, my like freshman year of high school, I just remember this a lot, where everybody was like playing up the struggles of their family constantly. That we, they didn't come from money, and we don't have, any kind of thing that could make them seem not doing well monetarily. And and then seeing, the people who were just like, flaunting wealth constantly, and I saw that as well. But it was not the norm anymore. And I remember thinking like that would be what I would assume to actually be the norm. And even if I disagree with it, it does seem like it would be the default, but it isn't anymore, because I think of social media, where everybody was, we loved an underdog story so much that and also there was, you're kind of just given it's assumed that almost that you're a better person if you're like not wealthy, and I think that that's wrong, and it's kind of led to this culture of false humility. And you'll see like presidents do this. I remember seeing Obama do this all the time, where he would say some statements about, like I, thankfully, Michelle chose me, and what was she thinking? It's something like that. And some comedian was like, well, I mean, I guess you have done kind of well for yourself, though, so like maybe it wasn't the worst choice, and everybody laughed, and it's like, no, why would you even say that kind of thing? Like, if you, in order to go for somebody and approach somebody like potential spouse or something like that, you have to think that you're worth their time. And so why would you ever state that you're not? And it really didn't jive with me. And I see this everywhere now. And it's the same. The other side of this is calling people arrogant who think that they can do anything that seems grand. And then we have people constantly trying to play up their struggles. There was this South Park episode. It's very funny, and it's about like DNA testing, and it's called like DNA and Me, and it's one of the best episodes of South Park. And this commercial comes on for DNA and Me. It's like 23andMe, and it just shows that it's a bunch of like white people in America who are getting tested, their DNA tested, and telling everybody that they're actually like 2% African or 3% Native American, and then at the end they're like, I'm actually a victim of oppression. And it's like this, they're so happy that they find out that they're this victim of oppression, which is just in of itself degrading of people in these cultures anyways, but still. And it just shows this this is like this false humility that people want, and but true humility is just honesty with yourself and about yourself. Because I remember asking myself, like, when people were calling me arrogant, I was like, I'm not arrogant, I'm confident. Wouldn't just sit here and make claims that make me either look like a crazy person or could be right. If I didn't think that they could be right. Like, I don't think I'm not looking for accolades, and so I started thinking, what is humility? Humility is it is the honesty with yourself and about yourself. And I also think that that honesty about yourself it really takes a step up when it comes to recognizing God. And they go on to talk in here about something that I've always really, especially over the last few years, come to really admire about a lot of people who I know who are Muslim, friends of mine, people who I've met, people who I see, who, they'll say things like, it's their focus is on God. It's like all the glory to God. How do you feel? You just won this fight, and people who don't have usually who aren't Muslim, though, it's like there is this arrogance to it. I'm the best. Nobody can beat me, and I'm just the best. I don't know, and maybe you are the best, but it's like if you are the best, then it's partially because of your own efforts, but it's mainly because of God. And He's put you in a situation that has allowed you to do the things that you need to do, and also been given you the body that you have that allows you to do those things as well. And but yes, you did put in effort. You do get some of the credit. I do believe that. Anybody who's like, there's no credit to me, that's false humility. And religious people do that too. But most of the credit to God always. And they talk about this, and I think that it's something that Muslims have a culture of, and I think it's a very good thing. But it can go too far too, and be like, where you're just nothing. It's like, yeah, you're nothing without God. You are nothing, but without you, God is meaningless too. Like without multiplicity of sentience, God is just a meaningless sentient being, existing eternally, and that's why probably He created multiplicity. Is who wants to be that? So, when people say you need both humility and arrogance, no. Same again here. This is what I mean. It's one of these quantum mechanics versus general relativity, or free will versus determinism, or now it's humility versus arrogance. No, none of these things are against each other, and arrogance is not a good thing either. Any time, it's never a good thing. Confidence is a good thing. It's different than arrogance. Humility is a good thing, but it isn't. It has to be true, or else it's not even humble. Like I've said before, saying things like, "I could never even hope to come up with the mathematical constraints of the origin of the universe, of the creation of the universe, and so I'm not even going to try." And that it's almost arrogant though, because it's still making it about you. It's like all about you. But what if you're in a position, you've been placed in a position where you could figure that out? It's like, well, maybe I should try. And so there's no conflict here. But I do think that it's very important, in order to stay humble, and it's probably the most important. People say things like, "What's the most important quality of like a scientist?" And a lot of people think it's intelligence, and it's not. But it is important. But it's not the most important. A lot of people will say, that it's all kinds of different things. But I actually think that it's humility, like true humility, not fake humility. True humility. True humility is a confident humility. Because it's honesty, and but it's honesty with oneself, about oneself. If you aren't humble, truly humble, then you can't check yourself. When somebody comes up with a counter to your work and you see it, but then you don't want to see it, so you look away. That is going to be the beginning of your downfall, as far as your ability to stay relevant. I mean, this happens to almost everybody, I think, but at some point. But we should try and resist it as much as possible, and stay as humble as possible. Not even try and resist it as much as possible. Try and stay as humble as possible throughout these endeavors. And it does take an enormous amount of humility to continue to check yourself if you're working on a fundamental theory and be like, am I really seeing what I'm seeing? Does this make logical sense? Or am I crazy? And am I, you have to have so much humility in order to do that. And if you have the humility to do it, and you actually realize that, oh my gosh, there's actually so much logical consistency to the models that I've been making, then that should give you the confidence to present it. And I think that certain words should always be thought of as negative, and almost shouldn't even exist. And one of them is arrogance. And I've always, not always, but you know, I don't think that we should recognize our limitations, but you know, but you should not be placing artificial like constraints on yourself either, just for the sake of looking humble. That's what's happening. People are trying to look humble instead of being humble. That's a different thing. Be humble. Don't look humble. Sometimes being humble means looking confident, or even looking arrogant, but being confident. Not even, it's not, being humble is confident, and being confident looks arrogant. Like, that's what I'm trying to say. It's very, very important to recognize this in people, and recognize this in yourself. When I see certain people out there and they say things with such a certainty, but then I realize, like, I do that about some things too, because I'm that convinced. I should not let that make me think less of them, even though I know that sometimes it does. I have to be humble with myself and be like, yeah, actually, if you don't trust him because he seems so confident, then that would be a little hypocritical. So. They talk a bit about Twitter and anonymity online, and you know, I don't know if I think it's important to talk about here, but I do think that I've mentioned it before on this channel, and I think that I do basically end up agreeing with it. What Eric states is that we need to start respecting each other more. But the thing is like, you need to have a consistent framework that implies that you should behave a certain way and honor other people. And our current ideas of agnosticism or anti-theism being the only accepted mentalities of people involved in scientific discussions does not lead to anywhere but nihilism or potential nihilism, which then ends up with pursuing of entertainment and then trolling and things like that. It's just, I don't know. I agreed with everything that they said about Twitter on there. I highly suggest you should watch it. We can do another stream on it later, but I don't want to get too into it because it's getting a bit late. But just know I agree with what they said. I think that Eric said something at some point, and he's like, you know, I don't think that these people realize that there are some cultures where some bad things happen to you when you talk about somebody's mother, something like that. And I came from that kind of culture, like, and where, you know, my parents have, you know, told me stories about, like, that's how people really got hurt is by saying something about someone's mom. And honestly, that should be somewhat the case, is that there should be some limits as to how we just treat people. We should treat people well. And you know, I hear a lot. I know some people, and I do understand this, is like everything's fair game to mock, and I think that there's a way of doing that that is good, and then there's a way of doing that is not. And true humor, mockery should be, if we mock something, it should be something, not someone, really. And even if you use someone as an example sometimes, but it should be truly funny for the sake of of humor itself. Because what humor is what it's what allows us to deal with things that are uncomfortable, but are kind of universal. That's what makes them funny. If they're only something that's uncomfortable for you, then it's not funny. But if it's something that we all recognize as something that is uncomfortable to us all, and we kind of have to face it in some way that entertains us, that's funny. And but there is a difference between in the goal of mockery for the sake of basically like combat online, like online combat essentially, and humor for the sake of unifying, and humor is grace giving. It must be. Mockery is not grace giving. Mockery is the opposite of grace giving. It's picking apart. It is a fight, and fighting should be done as only when needed. And I say that as somebody who is, a martial artist my entire life and practices all kinds of different ways of self-defense, and has had to use it, and is familiar with everything from your hands and feet to firearms. And there we'll talk about that in a minute with them. But violence is sometimes a necessary thing, but and mockery is kind of just, it's like a non-physical violence, but it's not good. So this is one thing, is like I try and be online as impeccable with my word as possible, and I fail sometimes, but I am getting better at it over the years. And I used to not. Like, every single thing online was a fight politically, and especially when I started changing my political opinions, it was like if I could tear the person down and show their hypocrisy and everybody looked at them and thought, "Ooh, that must have stung," like, then you won. It's like, that is just such a waste of time. Don't you? We all. I don't want to say, don't you have better things to do? We all have much better things to do. So they talk about this. They talk about, in this next clip, weapons, and this is why it's relevant if you're going to talk about physics. But I really appreciate that Eric says some things on here that he admits a change in his perspective, and I saw this in his brother too, and I really respected it because I had gone through this a few years earlier, actually, which was a change on like the mentality of the Second Amendment, and I grew up in a house which was very like pro-gun control and things like that, and but I just realized our institutions were failing and could not save us, and they couldn't ever anyways in those certain circumstances. It was the illusion of it, and this is the same exact thing that I was getting at earlier. Is like, we're so focused on the illusion of how we want people to think. We feel so when people talk about arming teachers and stuff like that in schools. Yeah, you would feel safer being around. Like, we wouldn't strip the president of their armed bodyguards because we'd be like, yeah, they're less safe. And so we recognize that, like, being around trained people who are armed, who have good intentions, does in general make you more safer and more protected against violence. But then the narrative switches to, in that discussion especially, but kids need to feel safe in order to learn, and how are they going to feel safe in that type of environment? And but cops go into schools and give like little presentations and stuff all the time, and you teach your kids to go to the police if they ever are in fear for their life or something. So it's like, it's just really inconsistent. But and the reason for that is because it's about looking safe more so than about being safe, and we're about looking humble more so than we are about being humble. We are about looking confident even in more so than about being confident, and that leads to like trolling and mockery online. It's like, it's about looking confident, and you would never say those types of things to people's faces a lot of times, and it would be a very bad idea to do it for multiple reasons. Not even because they might hit you, but because it's just cruel. And it makes, not only does the internet shield us from feeling the emotions of people when we say things to them, when we see their eyes change and you're like, I just hurt them, that sucks, I'm really sorry. Like, I remember being in high school and like I remember saying something about somebody, and it was like, it hurt them, and I just remember like immediately feeling horrible and later going and apologizing. And that doesn't happen on the internet. You don't see the person's eyes change when you say something horrible. And not only that, though, is that like you don't people don't see you as complete form as they would need to in order to judge you properly. So they might look at it and be like, that's funny. But it's like when two people are in front of you and you see this going down, you're like, that's really not funny. Because that's not what I would want done to me. It's like this, the golden rule really does solve a lot of things. And we should apply it online as well. So, but this is them talking about the Second Amendment and weaponry, and I think it's important.
An absolutist frame of mind, you have to hope that you're not going to meet the edge case. A good example for me was the Second Amendment. I noticed that many Second Amendment types took an absolutist perspective, saying the right to keep and bear arms will not be infringed and don't bother me about a well-regulated militia. I said, okay, I'm not going to talk to you about a well-regulated militia. My question is, should the Davy Crockett be sold at Kmart? And they would often say, well, what's the Davy Crockett? And I said, well, it's about a 100-pound personal nuke. Well, first of all, I was very flabbergasted that a lot of gun enthusiasts did not know that there was a personal nuke developed by the United States. But then immediately, many of them saw where this was going, which is, okay, if we're going to restrict personal nukes at Kmart, then you've got your foot in the door, the camel has its nose under the tent.
It's a difference of degree, not a difference of kind all the way down.
Exactly. So I think that personal nukes have to be sold at Kmart because the American population needs to keep parity with the American military. And then I say, well, do you realize what you just said? Do you realize that you've bounced out of your very simplified framework? They don't. And this is partially the problem, which is that if you can't talk about taste and trade-offs and balance, because it's all squishy, then you have all of these people running to these different ultra simplifications, none of which work.
There's a quote from one of my smartest friends, Gwinder.
Okay, so I see I resonate with the sentiment of it, but I will say this: as I had to be humble with myself at a certain point, I grew up very anti, even though I was pro self-defense because I was a martial artist my entire life, and firearms are just part of martial arts. I had not grown up with it, and it made me uncomfortable, and I didn't understand it, and I didn't know how much I didn't understand it. And so eventually, though, I did have kind of a wake-up call with this, and I really ended up becoming an expert on this matter. I mean, I've worked in the Second Amendment world as my job even in the past. So, and I personally understand it quite a bit. And I remember my friend asking me, he's like, Tyler, are you taking an absolutist perspective on this, though? This was many years ago. And I was like, yeah, I think so. But I was thinking about it in terms of personal firearms. But then I sat back and, for all night I thought about it. I was like, but what about, things beyond this? Obviously, nukes. And I do know what the Davy Crockett is. It's a little shoulder-mounted, nuke, basically. It's like this big. And the thing is that we don't need to think about trade-offs. This is the problem. It's not a balance between arrogance and humility and safety and freedom and all of these things. It's we need to recognize what is the point of being armed. The point of being armed is self-defense. That is the goal, the good goal of being armed. And so that leads to certain constraints that would actually imply certain limitations to certain capabilities. And those capabilities actually end up being limited naturally. And one of them, and I thought about it, I was like, what is the real danger? Because nobody's going to want personal nukes, really, because you can't use it for defense, and it's like a lot of you can't use a lot of these weapons for defense. So, but what is kind of this natural limit that comes out of this, and that isn't well, we're just going to draw the line arbitrarily, and I don't think you need to draw an arbitrary line if personal defense is the goal. Personal defense implies that you need to be armed on you, really. And I think that the line naturally gets drawn at remote controllability. It's funny because everybody's so concerned with guns. It's like you can't control guns. But the thing is that nobody's concerned about drones. Drones allow you to be armed in a place that you're not existing in. So it removes the consequences of being in an armed situation. This is exactly the same as what I was talking about a minute ago about online versus in-person mockery or fighting, that's what it is. It's combat. And you wouldn't say those things to somebody online. It's like, well, the incentive structure's changed because you're disconnected. And but when you have to place yourself in real danger, because you can only access a weapon that's on you, that is, it sets up an incentive system that kind of favors avoiding violence for the most part. But if there's drones involved, and remote controllability, and timers, and all kinds of other things, it's like these are offensive tools for the most part. And but what's also interesting is that they can be jammed and things like that. And so there is this, I'm not saying advocating for anything right now. I'm just saying that I'm looking at the world and I'm saying there is a natural kind of like lines that get drawn in these situations when you approach them from the right question, instead of saying we just need a balance of these two different opposing ideas. No, you don't. Balance is not the goal with between safety and freedom. It's what is the goal of being armed. It's like self-defense. Okay, so now we can work from there to figure out like what's the natural limit of this. How good is a drone with a weapon mounted on it at protecting you? Not, right? Not. So it doesn't. There's less of these conundrums than people think, is what I'm saying. And it's another. We're going to do an episode on tools eventually because of the implications of new physics leads to new technologies and new tools. And, we talk about tools are a very big part of this. It is the fruit of the tree of knowledge, is tools, technology. And it can be used for saving lives and for prosperity and for empowerment and also for horrible, atrocious acts. So... nukes are not the line that people should be talking about. That was my point. If you want to look at objective lines in this, and you want to look at this logically, you have to start looking at, okay, set a goal. What is the goal? Self-defense, okay? And defense in general. It's like, well, what tools are now not about self-defense? Ones that you operate remotely. That's what. So this is them talking about
1990
men, and in this next clip, and men are struggling quite a bit. Obviously, it's not a secret. But so are women, but it's more. Our institutions are increasingly geared towards women, so it's becoming increasingly difficult to see it with women, and it's much easier to see it with men for most people. And I want to hear. What some of the things that they said.
Number of men who said they had zero close friends was around about 3%. 2020, that number was 15%.
That's insane.
The most common answer to the question, how many friends could you call on in an emergency, is zero. The most common. It's not the average, but it's the most common. More people have zero friends to call on than have any other number. the challenge of modern masculinity relates to that addiction quote, the belief that you can find fulfillment alone. And you see this in the Sigma male meme, Sigma male grind set,
I don't know this.
So you have, alpha, beta, the sort of red pill, the blue pill, the purple pill, halfway between the two.
I don't know this either.
Okay, so the Sigma male steps outside of the existing dominance hierarchy. He doesn't try to lead. He doesn't try to do anything. He is a lone ranger, law unto himself. Over the top of a lot of this meta meme which is being created is a guy called Chris Bumstead, who is a 4-time classic physique champion, Mr. Olympia.
Okay.
Classic physique is, they have weight limits, which means that they have a much more Arnold-esque. It's all about shape and sculpture. Okay. Massive, but not a mass monster. Phil Heath was sat in that seat not long ago. Mass monster. I sit down with Chris, this guy who is the face of the Sigma male meme.
Okay.
Perhaps one of the driving forces behind young male belief at the moment. And I asked him, how much of what you've done and achieved in business, in personal life, and in your sport could you have done on your own? 0. I could have done none of it. I couldn't have gotten through the difficult times emotionally without my fiance. I couldn't have built my personal brand without my best friend and videographer, Calvin. I couldn't have run my business without Vaughan and my other business partners that are here. I couldn't have done any of this stuff. And this is the guy that he's in the ice tub as there's dubstep music over the top of him saying, you don't need anybody else, and so on and so forth. The belief that you can find fulfillment alone is a lie. It is a lie that people who have been hurt and scorned and rejected by the world retreat into. There is a safety blanket of cynicism that people can use. It's sour grapes at an existential level. The belief that the upside of never trying is never having to feel the pain of failure. And the generalized risk aversion, the extended adolescence, the slow life strategy permits that to seep ever more into people's lives. In a world where we have hyper-convenience, why should I feel discomfort?
Okay, so I want to say something about the Sigma male thing because I've thought about this quite a bit, and I fit into this box of the Sigma male. And here, if we look at this, who is a Sigma male? Popular, successful, but highly independent and self-reliant. It says that basically they exist outside the dominance hierarchy, okay, and of men. And there is a dominance hierarchy. There is the alpha male. There's the beta or bravo or whatever. And beta usually means like there's a couple different scales, but there's a group beta or gamma, which is like I don't know, just like effeminate and kind of seen as like pathetic and not I don't know, just it's just not it's like the weakling. But and then there's the alpha obviously, and there's omega, and there's all these different like categories, and men have become kind of obsessed with where they are in this dominance hierarchy. And I actually think that it's kind of distracting, and you shouldn't really focus on it too much. I think that you are where you are, and you can't change it either. Any change that happens is a fake change. You might change the people that are around you and how they act towards you because maybe you make a ton of money and now all of a sudden everybody around you it sucks up to you, and it does kind of make you into the alpha in that situation. But it might not be your actual personality trait, it's them that's changed. The people around you has changed, not you. But this Sigma male is the one that always bothered me because I fit the description of it in some ways, and but I didn't think that how it was described made any sense. And my issue is when they say things like the Sigma male exists outside of the dominance hierarchy. There is no such thing as being outside of the dominance hierarchy. What a Sigma male is, if I am correct, and I think that I'm speaking from personal experience here, it is someone who whose position in the dominance hierarchy changes according to the situation. But it's not that he's outside it. You can't be outside it. Sometimes a Sigma would be, at the lowest position, and in this circumstance. And sometimes in this circumstance, they are confident enough in themselves because they are aware of some capability that they have that they are the alpha, and they end up or they appear to be an alpha in that situation. It's that their position in the dominance hierarchy is dependent on the situation, but it's not that they exist outside it. And because there are certainly situations where I feel like I'm like this, like I'm not the alpha, I'm not even like the second or anything like that. I've never picked up a girl in a bar in my life. Not that I think that it's a great thing to do always, but it's just a place where I feel not in my element. But that's not true of other instances where and there are instances where I feel very, very confident to myself to the point where I'm not worried about what other people think, and essentially almost would have alpha tendencies. But that's different than being outside of a dominance hierarchy. There's no such thing as being outside of a dominance hierarchy. It's just that where you are is more dependent on the situation. And what that means is that that's a more humble view of being a sigma male, as well. It's not about you, actually. It's like it's about where you're at, your position, where you are, and in what social situation you're in. And it's not just you're just like, screw the dominance hierarchy, and I don't need it, and I'm just gonna go take ice baths and win. And that's just a fake version of the sigma. It's not a humble version of the sigma. It's a version that is being presented to people, men, who, in order to sell someone's persona. Again, this is a problem of wanting to appear a certain way instead of wanting to just be a certain way. I am probably a true sigma male, and it is not that I'm outside the dominance hierarchy at all. There's no such thing as being outside of a dominance hierarchy. God is above you always too. So you are never top G. God is top G always. And I'm not ripping on anybody that specifically, but I know Andrew Tate says that, and I don't know why he says that. Maybe top gangster. I don't follow Andrew Tate, but enough to know. But top G, capital G, God is always above you in the dominance hierarchy. And anybody who doesn't realize that is going to have problems, no matter how cool they, seem, or how alpha they may seem in certain situations. Sigma is not someone who is outside of the dominance hierarchy. But the thing is at the same time, don't worry about this stuff at all. We all have the same responsibilities. We do. You have a responsibility to treat people well. You have a responsibility to pick one woman and stick with her. And get married. People who are like, oh, the alpha, they just have all these women around, and it's like, so what if they can? Be more focused on what they should do, not what they can do. And so why would you want to be anything other than what you are if we all have the same responsibilities? And this focus on the dominance hierarchy is not a good thing, because it shows that we're focusing on we're trying to find meaning. Where is our place in this? That's what trying to understand a dominance hierarchy is about. But we have eliminated responsibilities from this circumstance, and responsibilities to God. It's not just about what you can do. It's about what you should do. If you are a beta male or a sigma male or an omega male or whatever the heck other classifications there are, I don't know them all. I just know that I fit a lot of the qualities of what a sigma is defined as, and I know that some scales, I know what a gamma or a beta means, like a bravo, like these second the king's best friend versus the alpha, or the alpha's best friend is like the bravo or something. I mean, but it doesn't. None of this matters. Why does it matter? You are what you are, and guess what? It is the alpha's responsibility the beta's responsibility, the bravo's responsibility, the gamma's responsibility, the sigma's responsibility, the omega's responsibility. It's every man's responsibility to do the same exact things. Find one woman, get married to her, and have a family. Take care of them. Be nice to your neighbors. Be humble and honest. Like that. Who is not susceptible, or who is not who is this not required of? It's a requirement of them all. You know, it's funny. There's this hilarious video that went around, and it ends up like with, you know, being unfortunate for the kid who was involved in it, but some obviously like uncomfortable or not very confident teenage high school kid. He was in a classroom, and he basically starts talking to the teacher, and he's like, I'm the alpha now, and the alpha doesn't need to listen to the teacher. The alpha is above the teacher. And the teacher's like, well, you can not listen to me or listen to me, but the consequences are going to be the same. And in that moment, you can see the kid's mind is like, oh crap, like that's true. Like, and this is the reality, is that you are who you are. You should do what comes natural to you. You were intentionally made to be good at certain things and not so good at others. And no matter what you are in the where you are in this hierarchy or whatever model you choose, your responsibilities are the same. And what we expect from you should be the same. So what do you? There's no privileges that you get. You know, where people are like, the privilege of being the alpha is that all the women want you. But you have to choose one. Guess what? If all of them want you and you can only have one, that's actually a much harder place to be than if only one of them wants you and you want one. It sounds like a constant temptation to be the alpha. But you have to, if you don't have this moral framework of and you're not focused on what we should do, then you're just like focused on, oh yeah, the alpha, he has access to any woman he wants. No, he doesn't. Not without consequence. And there's multiple levels of consequence to this. And there's multiple checks that indicate why this is morally consistent, that you have the same responsibilities. No matter what type of man you are in this dominance hierarchy, in these various dominance hierarchy models, nobody exists outside them, and everybody is subject to the exact same responsibilities. This next clip here is important.
So what's going on with the modern masculinity movement?
It's fractured. So there is the manosphere, which is a broad term that describes people talking to men. I've never identified with it. I'm not a part of it.
Okay.
In as much as I speak to men about things that I struggled with and they listen, perhaps someone could put me in it, but I don't think that they help. I think fundamentally at the moment the masculinity movement sees women as adversaries and competitors rather than compatriots. I think that they treat women largely like an enemy to be avoided or a resource to be used and discarded. I think that largely much of men's advice benefits some men at the expense of most others. That if being a high-value man means sleeping with as many women as possible, but a low-value woman is a woman that slept with many men, what you are doing is creating a wake after you that other men have to pick up the pieces of if your goal is to be this high-value, high body count male. I think that... Let me give you this. So this is actually going into a paper, my first academic paper that I've ever been a part of.
All right.
So this is the male sedation hypothesis.
Okay.
There's an effect called young male syndrome. You heard of this?
Nope.
If you have a large number of dispossessed, sexless men throughout all of history, bad things happen.
Yeah.
Testosterone drops when you get in a relationship. It drops again once you have kids. This means, in large part, that women domesticate men in some regard.
They have to.
You don't want to take risk-taking behavior when you've got a newborn at home. Don't jump off that fucking cliff, okay? Like, go home. So, when you have large numbers of dispossessed young men who aren't having sex, what's their reason for integrating into society? They take a brilliant study is done of men crossing the road and the difference between when they cross and the distance from the nearest car, with or without the presence of women. You put a woman there, the distance closes massively. No women there, they're not bothered. Risk-taking behavior is a show. Look at my excess fitness.
Yeah.
Look at all of these risks that I can take. Look at the plumage on the back of my tail, right? So, throughout all of history, it seems like they set cars on fire and push over granny and cause havoc. In Portugal, 1700s, the first son, there was a disparity in the sex ratio, I'm not sure why. The first son was allowed to marry. Every subsequent son was put on a ship. Go explore the new world. Don't burn our home, was what they were saying. There is a question. We have very high rates of sexlessness, and we have very low rates of integration amongst young men at the moment. Why are we not seeing them going around and setting cars on fire? There is Jordan Peterson was featured as the incel god in he inspired a movie by Olivia Wilde starring Harry Styles a little while ago.
Okay, so why are they not going around setting cars on fire as much as we would have expected? Because they're doing it online. You know, on here they talk about all kinds of things. They talk about porn being one of the reasons. Yeah, that's true. They're seeking sex online basically without having to seek it in person, and it's fulfilling it, you know, temporarily, that urge. They are Eric Weinstein brings up that they're smoking a lot of weed, and I think that makes a lot of sense too. You know, when doing that every day, just kind of it for some people it can make it very easy to just be content in the moment. Just us. And I'm not saying that they basically they talk about all these different factors, okay, that could be responsible for this, but not once do they state that it could be that just the online space in general is where they're expressing this stuff. Like this lighting cars on fire is going and making an anonymous Twitter page and going and just, you know, mocking people as best you can, sharing with your friends, and everybody laughs. It's the same thing as like when everybody goes into, you know, primal mode in a riot, and somebody breaks a cop car or something and flips it over, or like breaks some windows, and everybody's like, yes! It's like you just shared a meme that just destroyed that guy. Yes! This is what's happening. It's not that this has gone away. It's that it's there, and as well. I mean, testosterone levels are dropping and things like that, but it's. I think that doesn't really explain why men are being less. They're not as rioting as much as we would have expected. But what's interesting is they do say that in this, Chris says that being around weapons increases your testosterone levels, and that's definitely true. and it is because when we're placed into the right environment is when things go to being the way that they should be, and you recognize that we are evolved for a specific context, for specific goals, for specific responsibilities, and to place us in there is to allow us to flourish. It's interesting when you keep animals like I do, and you keep like reptiles or something, and all of a sudden you give them a resource that they naturally evolved for. Like leaf litter. They've evolved to live in leaf litter, and then they've lived on sand their entire life, and then all of a sudden you give them leaf litter, and it's like you see them do these behaviors, and you're like, could you do that whole time? And it's just amazing to see. And we need to place people into the context that allows them to see their strengths and their limits, and see why we need each other. You know, my wife is pregnant, as I've stated on here before, due in the next couple months, and a pregnant woman is extremely vulnerable. She needs you to do all kinds of things. Needs you to. And in today's society where we've all, outsourced everything, where like if a woman needs something done and she calls like the handyman to do it, and then she'll say, see, I didn't need a man, even though you called a handyman like to do it. It's just not your husband around. But you call the cops instead of, your husband has a firearm, or something like that. And this, but when all of our interpersonal relationships are all just about sex and not about partnering long term and reproducing and having families and committing to each other for life, then you don't actually see the context that women need men and men need women. And you do end up missing the point where you get these phenomenon that I talked about on here before, of like the double standard phenomenon. It's like, well, just accept it. It's a double standard. If women sleep with men, then yeah, it decreases their value. But if men sleep with other women, it increases their value. No, it doesn't. Let me tell you how valuable a man is to a woman who he sleeps with and doesn't marry. He has negative value. Negative value. He has taken her time, wasted it, decreased her value by your own definition of and description of what makes a woman valuable. You've decreased a high value man decreases the value of that woman if he does not marry her. How is that a high value man? Because who's deciding what is a high value man? Isn't it women? It is. So if you don't ever marry anyone and you've slept with 1,000 women, you're negative value, not positive, not high value man. And this is why I think it's very important that we use the correct language here, because otherwise you are setting yourself up to ask the wrong questions. Why is a man high value if he sleeps with a lot of women? That's the wrong question. It's a bad question because there is no answer to it, because it's wrong. The assumption is wrong. A high value man is a man with competent skill set and a desire to grow that skill set and be helpful to a woman, and he commits to her for life. Do you know how valuable I am to my wife? I am essential to my wife. You know why I'm valuable to my wife? Not even just monetarily, even though that's part of it, but it's not all of it. She makes more money than me. I make enough to support us, but if I need to, just me, but so does she. And so, but that's not what it's about. She needs me for all kinds of other reasons. And it's clear to her. And I'm committed to her. And that makes me not just high value. I am the most valuable thing that she has. She's the most valuable thing I have. My child is growing inside of her right now. She's going to take care of that child when it's born. She helps me with everything all the time. In mentally, emotionally, physically, keeps this house together. I mean, she is a high value woman because she has committed to me. I am a high value man because I've committed to her. This is, again, a problem where when we are in the wrong context and we ask questions from the wrong context, which we get to from having the wrong initial assumptions to build from the very, very beginning of your assumptions. As far back as you can go, where did the universe come from? What is its nature? What is the nature of existence itself? Those questions influence how you understand what is a high-value man and what is a high-value woman. They influence whether or not you are able to make breakthroughs in physics. They influence whether or not you are able to ask the right questions across fields, no matter what the field. A high-value man is not high value because he slept with a lot of women. You're not valuable to her if you don't stick around. You're negative value. Negative value. That is true. Like, why would you want to be the alpha, or care whether or not you're the alpha, or care whether or not you're a sigma or whatever, if you have the same responsibilities? How do we have a structure that links our head, our heart, and our loins across, both in the moment and on a lineage basis, and in long term? Marriage. Like, this is why I focus on these things so much, is because you can't even see whether or not your questions are bad without being in the right context. Marriage is the right context for men and women to be in order to perceive our world. But it also means like embracing your role in that marriage and seeing, what can women do? What can women really do? Like a lot of amazing things that men cannot. But what can't they do? A lot of things that men can. And it's not a competition though. And like he said, like Chris said, this manosphere, whatever people want to call it, it is the male equivalent of feminism. MGTOW is just feminism. It hates feminism so much that it has become feminism for men. It's saying we don't need women. They just make life more difficult and are annoying. And sometimes they do make life difficult and are annoying, but guess what? We make life difficult for them sometimes, and we are annoying. But there would be no life without both of us. There's no life for them without us, and there's no life for us without them. This, you need to place things into the right context to see this type of stuff, to be able to be like, to realize, and I'm glad that Chris said this, because he's honestly the only person that I've seen say this, and I've been saying, other than myself, and I've been saying it on here for, a year probably, is that you can't have a double standard because if men sleep with a bunch of women, and you're claiming that women who have a low body count have high value, you're sleeping with them, not staying with them, and you are contributing intentionally to the lowering of the value, according to your own definition, of women at large for all other men. Like, you're screwing up the pond. You're shitting in the pond. Like, that's what you're doing for everyone. And you're also pissing off women, because now women are going to be like, well, we don't want men. Why would we need men? Men, all they do is they sleep with you and leave. Why would they need us if that's all we did for them? There's no solution to any of these social problems outside of marriage. It is the glue that holds society together. Men and women are not meant to get along outside of this. They are not. They're not meant to work together in this mixed gendered environment for the most part, the way that we have. They're not meant to be taught in the same things in the same types of schools. They're really not. And but they are meant to be together, and they are meant to be married. Like, there's this rabbi, Manis Friedman, who I listen to all the time, and he's brilliant on this stuff. And he says, men and women do not get along. A husband and wife get along. And I was like, yeah, there you go. And it is important that we not focus on men, not focus on women, focus on marriage. And that is the singular human unit that is replicative and is the lineage over time. It's not men who built society, and it's not women who built society. It's marriages who built society. It is an entity unto itself that is created when two people commit to living and together and taking care of each other and going through the natural processes of life. And it changes incentive structures, it changes understandings, it changes goals. It is economically efficient, and it makes you realize all kinds of things about why so many narratives are so dumb. And including these ones of like a high value man who sleeps with a lot of women. High value to who? No one. No one. It's just that the issue is that a bunch of men want to be that guy because that sounds like fun. For a time. I get that. But as I've said before, you cannot get everything from sex except in a marriage. The best sex is in a marriage. That's just a fact. And if you're married, you have more access to it than anyone who is, even an alpha male, with a ton of money. You just do. And that's very clear. I mean, look at the consequences of these type of actions. Every single man who follows this ends up being sued and accused and ripped through the town square and accused of taking advantage of women and Me Tooing and all kinds of stuff. It's like there's no way for that to not happen. You cannot avoid that other than getting married. It's not a matter of like, well, did he or did he not rape? None of that matters. It's like what matters is that eventually you're going to just have a miscommunication with somebody, or somebody's going to get very angry that you used them, because you do. And so I really think we need to start asking better questions in these discussions. But it is the focus. It needs to be not on men. It's on marriage. And then from marriage, we figure out, like, what are men supposed to be? What is a high value man in a marriage? You know, I said to some guy that I knew, he said something about, and this happens a lot. You know, I know a lot of guys that are, you know, they are attractive and or rich, or they have big followings or whatever, and I'm like, you know, hey, you should get a firearm. Hey, you should carry a pocket knife everywhere that you go. Everywhere you go. You carry your phone, carry a pocket knife. You'll be so useful to people around you. Oh, no, that's not me. Yes, it is. Yes, it absolutely is. It needs to be. Like, it does. We need to step up to the plate. Like, there is the same responsibilities for basically all of us. If you are attracted to the opposite sex, you have the responsibility of getting married. And that implies also the responsibility of that being the goal. It's not just eventually I'll get married after I have had my fun. No. The fun is in marriage. Trust me. You know, I've seen some people, they're getting heartbroken around me all the time. And I went through this too. When I dated, and you break up, and you in the secular world, we just do this. And we're like, we accept it as normal. We're like, yeah, you know, you're going to get your heart broken. No, this was not normal. Look at an Orthodox Hasidic Jewish community, or an Orthodox Muslim community, or Mennonite community, where they seek marriage for everybody in society, and they all really, the entire community is very focused on pairing everybody up to make sure that everybody has real meaning, not feels meaningful, but has real meaning with that is very also obvious to each other. And do you think that they are like, oh my gosh, he broke my heart, I hate men? Do you think those men are like, gosh, women suck, I just can't stand them, like, you know, they're just so annoying, we have to put up with them? No, they're gender segregated in some way, shape, or form, and they don't have to deal with each other in as many negative contexts. But the point is that they don't get their heart broken constantly, and we just accept it in the secular world. Even though I'm a theist, as deeply as you can be, I mean, as confidently as you can be, I have grown up in the secular world, and I was not a theist, and so I dated, and, you know, had serious relationships and not serious relationships, and then got married, and I can tell you that now I'm seeing other people who I care about, you know, friends of mine, family, whatever, who, like, you don't want to see them upset when they go through some breakup and somebody got hurt. It's like, because we're giving people things that we're supposed to give to only people who we're giving permanent things to people that we're meant to only give in permanent relationships. And it's not normal to have your heart broken 3 or 4 times by terrible breakups. All breakups suck. Otherwise you wouldn't break up. Like, and so we of course we end up, like, hating each other and thinking we're useless and meaningless to each other, and we make movies like, you know, Barbie. Not that it didn't have, you know, some good parts, but the message of the movie is that we don't need each other. And that's not true. If there's inconsistency or double standards, or two things that you have to balance between that are seem opposing, it means you are coming at this from the wrong framework. You know, I've said this before, and Eric said something like this once a long time ago in this interview. I forgot who it was with. He said, you know, I wish that they didn't exist, but I can't ignore the chess statistics when I look at like the disparity between men and women. And I don't think that has to do with intelligence, because being a chess champion self-selects for intelligence anyways from a pool of plenty of people, plenty of very intelligent women. But if the top 500 best chess players are men and only one of them is a woman, then it implies that there's something different, which I think is that men are emotionally detached from the moment in ways that women are not, and it allows us to be strategic and and that is what it is. I mean, it's not about intelligence as much. And the thing is this: if you look at like the manosphere, and they're like, see, men are better at chess, men are faster runners, men are better at sports, and women look at this and they're like, well, okay, you're just, now we're going to change the rules to make sure that we can get exactly what it looks like you have. And this creates just this competition between the two. And that is a horrible thing. As he said, Chris, he said, the manosphere views women as competition. This is exactly true of feminism. Feminism views men as competition. Not partners, competition. And so this MGTOW, whatever movement, whatever it's called, manosphere, whatever it is that is this response to feminism, it's just feminism for men, and it's just as destructive. And so it's just important to recognize that you have to focus on the right thing. What's the thing that everybody needs that also gives us the most meaning and is the context that grows society? Marriage. It's marriage. You focus on marriage. Society needs to prioritize marriage. It should right now. For a while, women said, "Oh, we prioritized men," and that wasn't really true, probably, and not as much as they think. Maybe sometimes, and then maybe in the 1940s and 50s, that wasn't actually. We did switch, and it did look to them like we're prioritizing men, because we're artificially keeping women at home because technology allowed for things that men historically only could do. And but we've still had these constructs. And so women got pissed and they wanted part of it. And then you got feminism. And the whole time we should have just been focused on marriage. It is what is responsible for the next generation. It is the transcendent structure. And that is, Eric said, earlier on here, transcendence is the thing that we need to focus on. That's true. And but my point was about the chess statistics. Is he said, I can't ignore the chess statistics. It's such an, I wish they weren't true. That's not true. Men are not good at chess so that they can beat women at chess. Men are good at chess because they are good at being strategic thinkers, and they're good at being strategic thinkers so that they can help women solve women's problems. That's the point. The skill set needed for chess is to solve problems for women. It's not to beat them at chess. And so context is what matters here, and we're missing the context, and you cannot understand it outside of a marriage. You cannot. Focus on the transcendent. Marriage is transcendent. Not men, not women. Marriage. Okay. It's not that Weinstein is not meme fluent. Key point. I disagree with Weinstein's criticizing men watching porn, smoking weed in their mother's basement. There is a logic to do this in today's world. Nobody's saying there isn't a logic to that, but it's still avoiding responsibilities. Go out, find a wife, build your skills, get male friends. They said in here that males majority of men have answered that they don't have any close friends anymore. I went through some things like where I really, throughout this like political changing and everything that people have gone through since, around 2015 till now. And one of the things that I've realized is that one of the most important things about men and male friends, true male friends, not like your friends because, you're getting something from each other, but true friendship is that you can tell each other when you think the other one is doing something wrong. You can criticize each other, and you can also trust it, as being well-intentioned, and you'll be like, well, you know what, he said this, so maybe I should listen, instead of like someone online who like you don't even know, or some teacher who could be manipulating you, some boss who has an agenda, or your parents who will always tell you what you think that they think you want to hear. It's like, but a male friend will tell you what he thinks you need to hear, and you will trust that he has the right intentions in mind. And it is harder and harder in today's world to recognize which of those friends are your friends, but it is important to try and have them. And I think that one of the best ways to do it is to go outside. And this, to bring it back to Chris's point, is he says on here something like, I don't mean this to be demeaning, but when people ask me this, and you can watch the whole interview, he says, my advice is go outside. And, I said to a friend of mine, or I guess an acquaintance, pretty recently, like, something about the importance of camping. He was like, no desire. I was like, that's not the point. The point is that you and some male friends of yours should go on a frickin' camping trip and learn to start a fire with each other. You know why? Because it shows you your friends. If your friends are only like your friends on your lunch hours at work, and it's like then you lose your job or whatever and you never speak to them again. It's like these are friends of convenience. There's nothing convenient about camping. It's very inconvenient. That is the point. Go do something inconvenient where you rely on each other. And you will probably increase your testosterone or something like that. Did those videos shock? Okay. They want friends. They see a shared experience. They like. Okay. Said like a true capitalist, never keep your eye off the ball. Me? I don't know what you meant by me being a true capitalist. I don't even know if I would identify with that. But yeah, I'm a marriageist. Anyways, I think that I'm going to call it. But I think it's very important that they say a lot of things, and that go on in this. And I agree with so much. Guys, I have 49 clips listed in this list of this interview. So that's why this could go on and on. But I'm going to call it because it's just late. But I highly encourage you to watch the entire interview. It is linked down below. I really appreciate that Chris and Eric both put this out. I thought it was a great discussion. And, sometimes these talks that people go on, just by the nature of just us being limited beings, we start repeating ourselves a lot. It's pretty quick. It takes like two different interviews for you to start repeating yourself. But there was some things in this that were really... they were not said yet in other discussions that I had seen. So really appreciate it. And I appreciate everybody watching. Please hit the like button. Like I said, there's more that I want to talk about, but it's just not, you guys can watch it yourself. And I just don't have time. But it was a great talk. And please share this with anybody who you think might find it valuable. And if you'd want to join our Discord calls on Thursday, please private message me on Instagram. With that, thank you, everyone. Peace.